How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is What If Deku Had a Perfect Copy Quirk, the movie. Sit back, relax, and enjoy, and now, let's begin. Hey, Mom, what do you think my quirk's going to be? Izuku would ask towards his mother. She would then turn towards him. That's quite the good question, Izuku. I'm not quite sure. Quirks are quite the strange thing, although I do know they get stronger as each generation passes. So, what I would say, since your father has a fire quirk and I have a telekinesis quirk, you could get a stronger one of either of them. Although quirks are quite strange, they work in mysterious ways, and you could get a completely random quirk for all we know. It has to do with just random parts, I guess. I mean, I'm not a quirk doctor after all, so why don't we hop in the car, since it is your 4th birthday after all, and you're finally allowed to go to the quirk doctor's office. Izuku would pump his fist in the air, yelling, "Yeah! I can't wait to figure out what my quirk is!" As they would drive off to the quirk doctor's office. They would then just check in before sitting down as Izuku was hopping up and down in his seat, as he just couldn't contain himself, waiting for just to hear what his quirk was. "Mom, what do you think my quirk's going to be?" Izuku would ask very quickly, as Inko would then just facepalm. "Izuku, you've already asked this question. Please just stop drawing attention was right now. It's kind of embarrassing. Everyone's eyes are on you." As Izuku would just say, "But Mom, I can't wait to become the #1 hero," Izuku would yell, jumping up in the air, pumping his fist. "I'm gonna become the #1 hero just like All Might. I can't wait to save all those people." As Inko just sort of, "Yeah, sure, no, but please just sit down and calm down. You're gonna have to be calm when the doctor's taking the tests, or else we're gonna have to go home and wait till tomorrow to do it." Izuku would instantly jolt back down into his seat, looking serious as ever and completely calm. This meant the world to him, and he wasn't about to have his complete emotions take over and he couldn't take the tests. So finally, when the doctor came in, he would ask for Inko, as they would then walk over towards where the doctor was. They would go into a private room where the doctor would take some samples and some tests. He would come back 30 minutes later, looking down at a clipboard. "Although we have no clue what your child's quirk is, we do, however, know your child does have a quirk. We can't completely identify what his quirk is until he awakens it, so I would give him about a week or so until he awakens his such quirk, and that's when you can bring him back in and we'll identify it." Inko would nod her head as they would then leave back to their house. Izuku would sit back down onto the couch, watching just clips of All Might saving people and All Might talking to the news reporters, just showing off his sheer power and muscles. Izuku would idolize All Might from the very day he was born. He wanted to be like All Might so much, and so it meant the world to him if he had a strong quirk or not. So when the words left the doctor's mouth that Izuku had a quirk, he just couldn't contain himself, as he would be jumping up and down. He would then start to think, "I wonder what my quirk could possibly be. Could it be something strong or weak? Well, I guess I'll just have to wait." As Izuku would look over towards the family pet, as all of a sudden he would then start to copy the family pet's movement just completely perfectly, as the cat would take one step forward and Izuku would do the exact same. As Inko would look down at her child, who was on his hands and knees copying the family cat, as she was just confused. "Izuku, what are you doing?" As Izuku would look towards his mother, as he just felt on instinct that he should just say, "Oh, I'm copying the cat." Inko would be quite confused before she would then realize this is probably his quirk, as she would then ask Izuku if they should go into the car and go get it checked out, as they had just arrived back home and Izuku's quirk had just awakened. As Izuku would end up walking back towards the car, they would hop in as Inko would then drive off, where they would still see the doctor in the eating room just checking off different things. As they would then arrive, the quirk doctor would then realize what had happened. I'm guessing Izuku's quirk materialized and started forming, I guess. Those aren't quite the greatest words, but yeah, Izuku's quirk just kind of came about. He started copying our cat. I'm kind of confused about it, but that's pretty much what happened. The quirk doctor would look down at Izuku, as Izuku would then look up back at the quirk doctor. "Hold on one second," as the doctor would then take a glass of water, as he would then put some water into it, as Izuku would then see this as he would then put his hand out as water would start to just spit out of his hand. Well, that's what I thought. It's quite the rare type of quirk, but your child has a copy quirk, but it just depends on what type of copy quirk there is. There's a type of quirk where you can copy the quirks just by looking at it or touching the person with the quirk, or you can have a complete perfect copy quirk. Although we've never seen it before, we've theorized that there's some people that actually have it. It's basically where you can copy the movements of anything and everything, and you can even copy quirks just by looking at it. So, after seeing this, I think Izuku might be one of the rare lucky ones that has such a thing. As the doctor would then bring it back, asking Izuku to perform things, bringing in a couple people to show Izuku their quirks, as Izuku would then be able to perfectly mimic those quirks, as the doctor would then nod his head. Yep, it's as I thought. His quirk name is Perfect Copy. Just like I said, he can copy anything and everything just by looking at it, and even quirks. He just has to see the quirk in action after all. So, I think you have quite the powerful quirk, young Izuku. I think you'd make a great hero one day. Congratulations. Izuku would smile proudly, knowing that his quirk is going to become the best and most well-known quirk in the world, as he couldn't wait to become the #1 hero after all. As Izuku was smiling in his seat, all proud of what his quirk was, his mother would then grab his hand before telling Izuku it's time to go, as they would then walk back to their house. After that day, Izuku would arrive back in school as he would be excited to show everyone his quirk, as he would then tell everyone to gather around, as he would then show everyone his quirk, as water would start spitting out of his hands in just a short jet like it was a hose, as many of them would look on just Cool, Izuku, so you have a water quirk? As Izuku would shake his head. What do you mean, Izuku? We just saw water come out of your hands. Hey, can anyone show me their quirk? As some of the older people in the class would show Izuku's quirk, one of them being Katsuki Bakugo, who just a couple of weeks ago had awakened his explosion quirk. As Bakugo would show Izuku's explosion quirk, just boasting about how it was going to be the best and he was going to be the #1 hero, as Izuku would then put his hands in the exact same just formation that Bakugo had, as explosions would start to ignite out of Izuku's hands. As Bakugo would look on in shock before yelling for Izuku to stop copying his quirk, you copycat, as Izuku would just sort of laugh. Oh, come on, Bakugo. I'm just using your quirk. Imitation is quite the form of flattery, as Bakugo would just look on towards Izuku, who had just used some big words. As Izuku would just be smiling down this, as many of the kids in the class would just say, "Whoa, Izuku, what is your quirk?" Izuku would then tell them that he has a quirk called Perfect Copy, and he can copy almost anything and everything, as they would just nod their heads, as Izuku would just say, "Yeah, it's kind of a cool quirk after all, I can pretty much do many things." As a couple of months would end up passing, as many people would grow to be great friends with Izuku, as Bakugo would also be there in the class. Everyone had learned how powerful the two quirks are, as they just grew to have many friends throughout the entire school. As Izuku was doing this, he would end up walking out to the playground one day, as it was time for Izuku to be picked up by his mom. However, his mother was 5 minutes late, as Izuku was just sitting out on a bench, as he would then turn to go over and play at the playground. As Izuku was doing this, he would see a small girl with brown hair, as Izuku would see Bakugo standing over her. "Oh, so you have some sort of gravity quirk? So weak. Let me just show you whose place you are in this world. Below me, after all." As Bakugo would slam his hand into his fist, as explosions would ignite out of it. As Bakugo would raise his hand up in the air to explode, Izuku would grab Bakugo's wrist, as Izuku would glare deeply at Bakugo. "Bakugo, what are you doing? We were just taught not to bully people. Why are you doing this?" As Bakugo would then shove Izuku's hand off of him before yelling at Izuku. "Can't you see, Izuku? Both of us have some of the strongest quirks I've ever seen. We're the top of society. We shouldn't have to deal with these mutts of people. They're worthless. They should be at the They should be working for us, Izuku, underneath our feet forever. As Izuku would glare back at Bakugo before yelling at Bakugo that his ideals have been twisted by his gigantic ego and that he needs to learn something. As Bakugo would then run off as Izuku would put his hand down towards the girl. "Hi, my name's Izuku Midoriya. Yours?" The girl would grab Izuku's hand as Izuku would pull her up. "Oh, my name's Uchaku Uraraka. Thanks for saving me." Izuku would just say no problem, as his mother would then honk the horn, signifying that she had just arrived. Izuku would look, realizing that his mother was there, as he would then rush over to the car, hopping in, as his mother would then help him with the car seat that he had put in. "Well, I see you've made quite the friend, Izuku. What you did. I guess you stopped some bullying going on. Great work, Izuku. You gotta always remember to be kind to others, and others will be kind back to you. It's one of the most important things, to always be nice." Izuku would nod his head, as Inko had just given Izuku a small lesson. As many years would end up passing, Izuku would learn how his quirk would become great for hero work. He had studied very deeply about how to become a hero, and even wrote down other people's quirks that he had even been able to copy, as Izuku had a complete database where he would look into his book and read out every single quirk that he had ever copied. As Izuku had learned something, he had forgotten about a quirk after a month of having it, and when he remembered it, it was gone. He couldn't use it again. So Izuku came up with the thought that if he forgets about a quirk, it completely just disappears from his database, and he cannot use it until he copies it again. So he'd copy down all of the quirks. He'd copy and read over them and realize what they were, just making sure it was embedded in his memory, at least for the quirks he wanted to keep. Izuku would also realize that since he has a copy quirk, his quirk, if he has an explosion quirk and he's going up against Bakugo, who has the same explosion quirk, he's going to need to know the weaknesses. And so Izuku would spend every night he would get home studying about the weaknesses of all of the different quirks that there could be. If there was a fire quirk, he would know that there needed to be a water quirk. If there was a water quirk, he would know there'd have to be the weakness to the fire or the water quirk. As Izuku would study all of this, making sure he had many of the weaknesses and strengths against other things, so that they could easily be able to defeat as many people as possible. Izuku was dead center on becoming the number one hero, and he knew he had to train for it. As Izuku would walking into class, as he would then sit down right next to his best friend, Uraraka. After Izuku had saved her that day, they had become quite close friends, Izuku even inviting her over to his house, as they ended up growing fond of each other, as they were just best friends. As Bakugo would end up continuing on bullying, however, each time Izuku would be there to stop him. And finally, Izuku would end up putting Bakugo down into his place. As Izuku would see Bakugo bullying a quirkless kid, as Izuku just finally had enough. Izuku was now 10 years old, and he had been sick of seeing Bakugo bullying people for the past 6 years. And so Izuku would only decide to physically act on it instead of just focusing on words. As Izuku would punch Bakugo square in the face, as Bakugo would then turn angrily towards Izuku. "What the hell, Copycat? Why did you do that?" Izuku and just glared at Bakugo. "Bakugo, when will you learn? Bullying's never the answer. Have you been so blind? And you say you want to become the number one hero someday. Would a hero do this to the same people your age? It doesn't matter if you have a powerful quirk or not. You're still a person. You're still a human being. Stop being blinded by your ego, Bakugo. Never have to say this to someone. You're completely blind, Bakugo. I couldn't believe you're trying to become a hero. If you keep acting like this, you're gonna fall down into a path of villainy, the complete opposite of what you want to become." As Bakugo would glare at Izuku before shoving him off, much like he had done when Izuku had grabbed his wrist all those years ago, as Bakugo would rush off back to his house, as he would then sit down on his bed, just looking back at all of Izuku's words. Was he really becoming a bully? Bakugo's ego had completely blinded him and couldn't manage to see what his actions were doing. As Bakugo would then finally realize that all of these actions weren't right, finally becoming a smarter person, as Bakugo would then give up his life of bullying. We cut a couple years in the future as it's Izuku, Bakugo, and Uraraka's final day of middle school. As all of them would be sitting down, Izuku would just be thinking, I wonder how hard the UA entrance exam's gonna be. As one of the person would turn around sitting in front of Izuku before asking him, "Oh, Izuku, you're hoping to get into UA? That's quite cool. I didn't really think I could make it, since my quirk's quite a bit weaker than you guys." As Izuku would then just frown. "Come on, you gotta at least try. If you don't try, you're just not even gonna make it at all. What's the difference if you try and not make it, or you don't try and don't make it? You should at least try and have that tiny chance of making it. It's quite the bad idea, just quite the bad thought to not even try when you could still get a chance of making it. You might even make it into the general studies courses, maybe, even if you don't make the hero course." As the person would nod, smiling at Izuku before thanking him, as they would then be seen as the teacher would walk in. "Hello, class. Today we are going to be finding out which high schools you all want to go to. I've seen some of the paperwork that you all have submitted, and I'm going to give you the time to either change it or dead center on it. So far, we have 3 people wanting to go to UA so far. Uraraka, Bakugo, and Midoriya. Congratulations, you two, completely finalizing on the paperwork to take the entrance exam for UA. It's quite the prestigious school after all. I wish you all luck in making it." Bakugo, Izuku, and Uraraka would all thank the teacher, as many of the students would just whisper to each other, saying how, yeah, they're most likely gonna make it. They're the strongest kids in the school. As the 3 had formed a strong bond together, as they had all started to train their quirk each together. As Izuku had found a beach completely just destroyed by trash, as they had been training together by lifting up the trash and throwing it into dumps, as their parents had helped fund them by buying them dumpsters to throw all the trash into, as they worked together to completely clear the beach, as there was even just a small plaque with all 3 of their names on it, saying that this beach was dedicated to them after they cleaned the beach up completely, as they all 3 knew that if they were going to make it to UA, they were going to make it together. As all of this was happening, the final bell would ring as everyone would rush out the door, as Izuku would collect his things, as both of them would end up following Izuku out. "Well, guys, you ready for the entrance exam? All we have is 10 months left to train our absolute hardest, and then it's finally time to wait and see if we made it or not." As Bakugo would then smile, "Yep, I know damn well we're gonna make it. We have 3 strongest quirks I've ever heard of." As Izuku would then just laugh. "Well, I wish you all luck," as they would then split in different ways and go different paths back to their house. As Izuku would be walking under a bridge back to his house, as all of a sudden a massive sewer drain would end up exploding and hitting the ceiling of the bridge. "Oh my, what do we have here? A child all for me, just for the taking." Izuku would turn around, completely being blindsided by the sludge villain, as the sludge villain would completely overtake Izuku's body, sending sludge flowing down Izuku's throat. As Izuku would completely just not know what to do, being blindsided by this entire thing. As Izuku would start to search his memory, thinking of anything that he could use, anything weak that could defeat the sludge villain, anything that would be strong against him, and the sludge was weak against him. But he couldn't think of anything. As Izuku would finally realize, maybe if he started just filling up the sludge villain with water, it could pop. As Izuku would slowly start to fill the sludge villain up with water, as the water would slowly just flow out of Izuku's hands. As Izuku getting weaker and weaker as his breath was diminishing even further, his water would slowly start to just stop coming out of his hands, as the sludge villain would then laugh. "Oh, so you have a weak little water quirk. Quite interesting. No wonder you were so easy for me to take over." However, that water had created a cavity within the sludge of the sludge villain, so if anything were to contact it at a certain way, it would completely destroy the sludge villain, causing it to explode. And just as Izuku's luck, a shining yellow golden figure would appear out of the sewer, as All Might would then wrap his fist together before he would wind his hand back. Detroit Smash! All Might would yell, slamming his fist into the sludge, as the sludge villain would then pop, exploding sludge and sewer water everywhere, as Izuku would then start to gasp for air, coughing out the little bits of sludge that remained inside of his throat. As he was coughing, he would end up looking up towards All Might before he would say, All Might, you're the #1 hero. I've wanted to be like you since I was a child. As All Might would then just laugh. Yeah, a lot of people be like me. So, I took so long to get here. So, young man, are you alright? Izuku would nod his head as he would then reach into his backpack, grabbing a spare sheet of paper. Hey, can you sign this in three different parts? My friends would have loved to meet you, and I know they love your signature. As All Might would then just say, sure, grabbing a pen out of Izuku's hand, writing his signature in 3 different spots, as he would hand the paper back to Izuku, as Izuku would look on, just in complete awe. As All Might would then say, goodbye for now, young man, as he would jump off, exploding into the near distance, as Izuku would look on, just in complete shock. However, All Might had neglected to do one thing. He hadn't collected the sludge villain. As the sludge would slowly start to collect together, All Might had collected some of it, but he didn't collect all of it. So the sludge villain would slowly start to collect together as sludge would end up coming out of the sewer as well, collecting, forming back into the sludge villain. However, by the time it was all together, Izuku was long gone. And just someone's luck, Izuku hadn't been there and Bakugo had, as he would end up being walking down a different alley as he would end up seeing some weird goo around his foot, as he would start to shake his foot violently, as all of a sudden the sludge would end up seeping out of every little crack within the alleyway, as Bakugo would just wonder, what the hell is this stuff? So he would get onto his hands as he would start to leap up over onto his arm and up into his shoulder, as he would start to grab hold of Bakugo's jaw, opening it open as Bakugo would start to struggle even more. What the hell is happening? As the sludge villain would finally materialize out of nowhere, going down attacking Bakugo much like he had to Izuku. As Izuku would end up walking back to his house, he would end up hearing an explosion from back behind him. As Izuku would look on behind him, he would end up seeing Bakugo, or he would end up seeing a massive explosion as a crowd would end up forming. As Izuku would rush over, he would end up seeing Bakugo entrapped by the sludge. As Izuku would end up realizing what was happening. Why aren't you guys saving him? You're pro-heroes after all, Izuku would say towards the pro-heroes at the front. We can't save him right now, it's too dangerous, we'd be harming many more people. As Izuku would hop over the guardrail before looking back, saying that he'll take his hand. He'll do it then, as Izuku would rush over, as Bakugo would be motioning for Izuku to get out of there. However, Izuku just couldn't let his friend die, as Izuku would activate Uraraka's Quirk, touching the sludge villain around it. It kind of worked, as Izuku touching some of the sludge, it would start to float up into the air. As the sludge villain would be floating up, Izuku would grab Bakugo's leg, causing him to float up as well, whereas Izuku would yank him out of the sludge, as the now weightless Bakugo was easily being able to get out of there. As the sludge would end up falling down to the ground, as Izuku would yell, release, Bakugo would be out the sludge, as Izuku would grab Bakugo, yanking him back as Bakugo was about to turn around and explode the sludge villain into tiny little pieces. So the sludge villain would end up staring on as the pro heroes would finally move in, taking down the sludge villain. However, it wasn't the pro heroes there. All Might had saw it and got in its way, punching the sludge villain, completely destroying it, as he would then finally collect it. However, when he would end up looking for Izuku, who had saved him and Bakugo were long gone, as they had decided to get home, as Bakugo would just say, look, I gotta go, I'm gonna be in trouble if I'm a bit more late, as both of them would end up scurrying off, as they knew they would get in quite the bit of trouble since both of their parents had texted them that they were meeting for dinner, and if any of them were late, they would get their butts kicked. And so when they would finally open the door, both their parents would be staring, oh, what made you two so damn late? As Izuku would rush over to the TV, dodging Mitsuki and his mother, grabbing the remote, turning the TV on, as the news would end up being playing, showing a replay of Izuku rushing in, saving Bakugo from a sludge villain. As both of their parents would just say, oh, okay. as 10 months of the 3 training would end up passing. So they would all be walking into the entrance exam together. They would then say, "So, who do you think's gonna have the highest score out of all of us?" "That's quite the question. I don't think it'd be me, though. You two have quite the more powerful quirk than I do." "Come on, Uraraka, don't say that. I think you have just as good of a chance as either of us do to get the highest score." As Uraraka would just sort of, "Yeah, I guess so." As they would then walk into the auditorium where they would then be explaining what the written exam was by the hero present Mike. "So, anyway, I have just passed out all of the papers for the written exam. You all have 3 hours to complete it, and anyone who does not complete it in those 3 hours will be automatically failed." As all of the students would be scrambling to just be able to pass the test, as many of them would get done in the test in under an hour. As many of them would be saying, "Oh no, I rushed. I know I'm gonna fail now." As Izuku had decided to take his sweet time, knowing that the threat of if anyone didn't finish within the time limit, it was just a threat to make people rush. As Izuku knew the test wasn't that big, and as soon as you ended up finishing it, you couldn't go back and just look over your answers, as the test was over a computer, and as soon as you clicked the final submit question, it was done. That way, if you don't do it, you could go back and look through everything. You can just look through it, and so Izuku took his sweet merry time. So as everyone would end up finishing, President Mike would end up explaining the next part of the exam, the hero exam. Izuku couldn't wait to do it, as they would all be handed out cards. It either had a B, or a C on it. Depending on what the letter was, that would be what city you were going to go to. As President Mike would end up explaining it, everyone had 30 minutes to make their way to the cities that they were in, being given a pamphlet map. All 3 of them would end up meeting together, showing their cards. Both Izuku and Uraraka were in City A, while Bakugo was in City B. Izuku and them would split ways, as Izuku and Uraraka would wish Bakugo luck, as Bakugo would wish them luck as well. They would all walk to where they were going, as Izuku would walk up to the Uraraka, who had decided to get there as soon as she could, wanting time to stretch. However, a shoulder would be planted on a hand would be planted on his shoulder. "I think that girl's trying to focus. I suggest you don't try to hurt her focus in any way. You could possibly cause her to fail this exam." Izuku would look back at the person who had grabbed his shoulder. However, by the time he did, he would end up seeing in the very corner of his eye that the door had opened. As Izuku would get down into his stance, launching off into past everyone, as Uraraka would do the same. Many of the people there would just sort of laugh. "Oh, look at those two. They're going to be disqualified after doing something like that." As Izuku would end up hearing some of them talking, as he would hear them saying, "Oh, they're going to get disqualified or something." However, after they had said that, President Mike would come over the intercom. "What are you two mumbling about? Go, go! Didn't you ever hear heroes don't wait for someone to tell them to start? You gotta be able to just start saving anyone as soon as possible. You can't be waiting for someone to motion for you to go." As all of them would just hop up, scrambling to jump off into the distance, as by the time they had, Uraraka had already destroyed many robots along with Izuku, knowing that Bakugo's quirk with the explosions would work quite well for this, exploding many of their robots into sheer just tiny little pieces, as just robot metal and parts would be flying all over the place, as Izuku would continue on rushing off, as Uraraka and Izuku had decided to use their quirks together, as Uraraka would touch the robots, barely dodging any of the attacks, where they would then float up, as Izuku would then slam his hands together, sending massive explosions, destroying massive amounts of robots. Uraraka knew that it was going to be hard for the robots to just be destroyed after hitting the ground from a short fall, and so with the combined help of Izuku, their quirks paired quite well, as Nezu would end up reading over their profiles. Ochako Uraraka, Quirk, Gravity, and Izuku Midoriya, Quirk, Perfect Copy. So, they figured out how to use their quirks quite well. It appears the Izuku kid copied a kid by the name of Bakugo Katsuki's quirk, his quirk being some sort of explosion thing. As Nezu would be talking, Izuku would continue on exploding. However, somewhere in between that, both Izuku and Uraraka had gotten separated. As Izuku would continue on just exploding robots, all of a sudden he would end up hearing 5 minutes left, as rumbling would end up being heard. Izuku would look to the ground, seeing it shake violently, thinking, what the hell? Is this an earthquake? As Izuku would look up to see a massive robot towering over him, as he would end up seeing it in the distance, Uraraka was standing there just looking up at the massive robot. As Uraraka would end up hearing, along with Izuku, a massive cry for help. As Izuku would rush over to where Uraraka was, as she would end up asking Izuku, did you hear that? Yeah, I did. It sounds like someone was yelling for help. As both of them would look on towards, they would see a black-haired girl stuck in the rubble right in the path of the 0-pointer robot, as the just commotion and earthquakeness of the slams of the feet of the robot had caused part of the building to fall apart, slamming down onto a girl. As Izuku would rush off, yelling that he'll buy time for the robot, and Uraraka should go and rescue the person, knowing that Uraraka wanted to become a rescue hero after all. As this takes us back to when Uraraka, Bakugo, and Izuku were training. They were training with one of them being stuck under rubble, while one of them was basically using their quirk to hold back imaginary villains, while one of them would go in and save the person under rubble. Since Uraraka had just told them she wanted to become the greatest rescue hero, while Izuku and Bakugo wanted to become a hero that could defeat many villains while also saving others. So they decided to pair this with their training, whereas Uraraka would get great at rescuing, as both Izuku, Bakugo, and Uraraka just trained their quirks as well. So Izuku would jump off, exploding with his hands, sending him flying up in the air. He would wind his hand back, slamming it into the faceplate of the robot, sending the biggest explosion Izuku could manage, as the robot would end up falling backwards from the forward momentum of the explosion. As the robot would be falling backwards, Izuku would fall down, as he would use his explosions to lighten and slow down his fall. As Izuku would be breathing heavily, he would then thank Uraraka for saving her while he destroyed the robot. As then see the girl who would thank both of them, as the test would be told that it had ended. As Izuku would be walking out, they would meet up with Bakugo, as they would then just be telling each other how they did, as all three of them said, well, I guess we're all gonna make it. As all of them would be walking back to their houses, where they would then part ways, waiting for their letter to arrive in the mail. However, Izuku's letter would arrive early. It had said that there was another kid with a copy quirk, and that Izuku needs to come in to UA so that they can measure it. Izuku would think, strange, I thought I did quite well, show that I'm the best. I thought copy quirks were quite rare. I guess someone also has it. As Izuku would be walking in it to UA, he would end up walking in it to see someone who was a blonde-haired person. As Izuku would see this just small bear-looking thing, as Izuku would put his hand out. I'm assuming you're Nezu. Nezu would shake Izuku's hand. Yes, and I'm assuming you're Izuku. This here is Nomu. He has a copy quirk. Now, I know you have a quirk called Perfect Copy, which sounds like it's better than every way than this kid. But I'll be giving you 5 minutes to prove to me that you're better than this kid. So why don't you start? As Onuma would then just start telling Nezu how he's so much easier and better than Izuku would ever be, and how he should be put into the hero program. However, Izuku would walk to Onuma before just looking at him. I'm guessing you didn't catch the hint, Nezu said. As Izuku would wind back his fist, punching Onuma across the face, as Izuku would then see Onuma holding his cheek in his hand. What the hell was that for? As Izuku would look over, just with a blatant look back at Nezu, as Nezu would just sort of sigh. Alright, that gives me everything I need to know. You boys can go home. As Izuku would be walking home, he would end up asking his mother about if there was anyone she had heard about, any other person with a copy quirk. Just like Izuku, she was completely clueless. So I guess there's someone else with a copy quirk in your same grade. That's kind of cool. Are you guys friends at all? Izuku would just sort of sigh. Well, I had to basically fight him to see who would be put in the highest hero program. He didn't put up much of a fight at all, so I'm guessing I'm in the highest program. A week later, Izuku would get a letter in the mail as he would wait to open it with the rest of his friends. So they would end up meeting up at Izuku's house, where they would be sitting in Izuku's bedroom as all of them would open the letter. As would then be told all simultaneously, "Congratulations, young UA students. You all have made it into Class 1A. Now, as it would start, Izuku Midori, Bakugo Katsuki, Uraraka, Uchaka Uraraka. As it would then read out, Izuku got first, Bakugo had second amount of points, and Uraraka in third. Congratulations for making it into UA High School. As all three of them would then explode, as Izuku would barely throw them out of his window as they would explode in the air right as Izuku did that. They would congratulate each other. Well, guys, it looks like we're going to be seeing a lot more of each other now that we're finally back in a classroom together, as they would then all sort of laugh. Well, yeah, I guess so. As all of that was happening, Izuku ended up going down, hearing that dinner was ready, as they would then go and eat dinner together. After that, all of them would be mailed a UA uniform that matched their size perfectly. As the next day would happen, it was their first day of school. Izuku would put on his UA uniform, as he would then head off into the direction of UA, getting a ride from his mother, as he would end up being dropped off at the gates of UA, as he would end up being just waiting for his friends to arrive. Once they did, they would all greet each other, congratulating each other one last time, as they would then walk in to the school of their dreams. They made it. They are now in the hero program, and they can't wait. As Izuku would walk in, he would marvel at the beauty of the UA campus. Man, this place is awesome. I can't wait to be a student here. As all three of them would just sort of laugh. Walking in, they would sit down at their desk, just waiting for the teacher to arrive. They were the first three to get there, as they would end up looking outside as clouds would end up starting to form. Well, it looks like it's going to be a gloomy day today, Izuku would say. So all three of them would be sitting just in a row together, with Izuku in just the front, Uraraka next to him, and Bakugo was in front of Izuku. Izuku was sitting behind Bakugo, so it kind of looked like an L with Bakugo on top, Izuku below him, and Uraraka next to Izuku. As they would end up looking outside, as Izuku and Bakugo got window seats, they would see thunder and lightning in the distance. Well, I guess it's not going to be the brightest day here. As all of this would end up being happening, finally everyone would end up arriving, as they would all sit down, just commotion, greeting each other and all of that. Quiet down, quiet down. It took you all 8 minutes to shut up. That's the worst I've ever seen from a Class 1A. Well, anyway, I'm your I'm your teacher and homeroom teacher, Shotaizawa. You may know me as the hero Eraserhead, but who cares with introductions anyway? Since it's raining, we can't go outside to test all of your quirks, so we might as well do a bit more of training inside the gym. What about the introductions and the whole speech by Nezu? That doesn't matter. You're Class 1A. We're heroes. You are the next generation of heroes, after all. I really could care less about some introduction from Nezu. Plus, I'm the Class 1A hero teacher. I can do whatever I want that best fits my students. So, why don't you all put your PE uniforms on? I'll leave it up to you for you all to find the key to the locker rooms and put your uniform on for all of your lockers. And then I want you to go down and meet me in the gym. Well, there's multiple gyms. I'll leave it up to you to find it. Whoever's last there, I'll leave it up to the class to see if you'll be expelled. It also determines on how you participate in the just 1v1s we'll be doing, as all of them would end up running off, as Izuku would end up finding the key easily, having read about how there was an entire key room where Izuku would find the keys, as Izuku would grab all three of his friends' keys, as Izuku would run off, giving Bakugo and Uraraka their keys to their locker, as both of them would all just make it to their lockers the quickest, where they would then get changed and head off looking for the gyms, as Izuku would end up being texting his friends saying, alright, Gym A, he's not in here, as they would all just be walking around looking at all the sorts of gyms, where finally Izuku would find it, calling his friends, telling them that it was Gym B that he was in. So they would end up getting there, Saul would look down at his stopwatch. Wow, that's record time. I guess you all be the first 3 fights, but of course, since you all made it using teamwork, I guess I'll have to do something else. As all of this would end up being happening, 20 minutes would pass as finally the rest of the class would end up arriving. You all are late. That doesn't matter anyway. So, here's what we're going to be doing. We are going to be doing a team fight. I decided not to do a 1v1 fight since mostly hero work's about teamwork after all. So, who wants to be on a team? Like I'd make you decide. So, the first 3 people that made it here will be on a team, and then you 3 will make it on a team. I would signal towards Todoroki, Momo, and Kaminari. As all of them would end up being happening, Aizawa would split the gym in half, as he would then tell all of the rest of the students to go sit in bleachers, where they would then look down as Aizawa would begin the fight. Alright, you may now begin. Whoever wins is by knocking out the 3 other teams or capturing them by using this capture tape. Aizawa would say, handing out this sort of tape that would be used to capture others. As all of this would be happening, the fight would begin, as Izuku would end up looking back at his 2 teammates, as Todoroki would start this by slamming his foot down onto the ground, sending a massive iceberg flying off towards Izuku. As Izuku, who had actually been in person to a fight of endeavors with a villain, Izuku would use Endeavor's Quirk, sending fire, completely decimating the ice that Todoroki had sent. As Todoroki, not being discouraged, would send another iceberg slamming down towards Izuku's team. However, Izuku would easily disperse of this again, as steam would end up filling the air of the gym. As Izuku would use this and signal for his 2 teammates to go and move out, as Kaminari would end up seeing both of them rush off towards him to capture him, as they had deemed him the weakest of the 2. As Izuku had seen what the 2 people's quirks were, being Momo and Todoroki, he had heard of what their quirks were and deemed that Kaminari's electricity would kind of be weaker than Momo and Todoroki's, so they should take out the weakest first, since Kaminari is just the weakest and would pose sort of a threat if he were to get in their way. So they would take Kaminari out very quickly, as Kaminari would end up electrocuting himself, as the tape would end up bouncing the attack back at Kaminari, as he would then just be looking dumb just at the people that had captured him, as they would throw Kaminari off towards Aizawa, who would then catch him. As finally the steam would clear, leaving both Momo and Todoroki to stare on at Izuku's team. So I guess you guys got the yellow-haired one, Todoroki would mutter before jumping off, rushing over towards Izuku, sending icicles flying towards him, as Todoroki managed to put ice around his fist, throwing punches towards Izuku. However, Izuku would dodge all of these before Izuku would copy Todoroki's attacks the exact way he had done, putting ice around his fist, as Izuku would slam his ice fist into Todoroki's face before he would put fire around his other fist, slamming it into Todoroki's chin, sending an uppercut behind. Why aren't you using your fire, Todoroki? I know you have another fire quirk besides just your ice, so why aren't you using it? You're half as strong as you would be if you were. Todoroki would glare up towards Izuku, saying that he's never gonna use that bastard's quirk. It's his father's quirk and not his. He'll never use it, as Izuku would just sort of laugh. Come on, Todoroki. It's your quirk. You're the one who can control your fire, not him. Why are you saying that it's his quirk, even though it's technically yours? You may have gotten it from genetics from your father, but that doesn't matter. As a Todoroki, a light bulb would just ignite in his brain, as all of a sudden fire would explode off from him. However, it would be immediately just destroyed, as the human fire extinguisher, Izuku, would spray Todoroki down, sending a wave of water barreling towards Todoroki as this wave would crash into him like a tsunami, sending him flying backwards as his head would hit against the padded wall, as Bakugo would then appear from the blindsided Todoroki, slamming his two fists down into Todoroki's cheeks, sending explosions out. As Uraraka was doing this, she was fighting with Momo, grabbing onto Momo's bow staff, pushing Momo back. With all the strength training Uraraka had done with both Izuku and Bakugo, this was no sweat to her, as she would end up picking up the bow staff, sending Momo flying backwards, releasing it, tossing her into the bleachers, as she would end up falling down before Aizawa would stop the match there. That's enough, I've seen enough. Congratulations, Team Izuku, Bakugo, and Uraraka. You have won this fight. As all of them would cheer out, congratulating each other, as Izuku would just give some credit to the other team as well, just saying that they were lacking in teamwork, even though that's one of the most important parts of being a hero. Still, this is their first day, after all, in UA, so they haven't had the possible training that the three of us have had, Izuku would say. As Aizawa would sort of nod before giving the next team a round to go and just start their fight, as the next teams would end up coming out of the bleachers and starting their fight, as Izuku's team would just sit there watching. After everyone had gone, Aizawa would look down at a paper where he had written down notes on all of the fights. Yeah, we're gonna need to work on your team abilities. You can't be heroes without being able to work with anyone and everyone that you end up meeting as a hero. If you're not gonna be able to work like this, you're not gonna be able to become a hero. So over the next 2 weeks, we'll be working on team building activities, so you earn everyone and gain a sort of trust with them. Like an example of Izuku, Bakugo, and Uraraka. I'm guessing that they've been friends for quite a while, so that's why they were easily able to win the fight in under 3 minutes. So, yeah, you all can go home for now. Weeks would end up passing as all of them had been working on teamwork and all of those sorts of things, as finally it was their first hero class, as it was scheduled for today, as all of them would be sitting in their seats wondering, I wonder what we're going to be doing today. It's our first true hero class. As whispers would erupt around the room, as everyone would just be talking, just spreading rumors about what they heard was going to happen. As all of them would be talking, all of a sudden they would hear stomping from down the hall. Hello, class! It is I, All Might! As all of a sudden their sliding door would be smashed in, and bits of drywall in the door flying back into the wall behind it. Hello, class. I know all of you know it's your first hero class today, and it might just make you even more excited about becoming a hero to know that your hero teacher's All Might. As everyone would look on in shock, as many people would jump up saying, Whoa, it's All Might! I can't believe it! You're the #1 hero! If them would say, as All Might would just sort of laugh, Yup, it's me, All Might. So anyways, class, after Midnight helped you all design your hero costumes, the support course, you then got to test some of their abilities making your hero costumes. So here you all go. As All Might would then press a red button, as hero costumes would end up coming out of a wall, as costumes would be in briefcases that had a number assigned to them. As earlier that morning, Aizawa had put numbers all on the desk, as they would be looking at their desk. As everyone who's wondering what the numbers meant, as All Might would finally give them what they wanted. Those numbers on your desk represent the number of your briefcase. Whichever number represents the briefcase has your hero costume in it. You can't be heroes without costumes, of course. You'll be figuring out your hero name around halfway through this year, so don't sweat about that. Although I do suggest thinking about what your hero name should be, as everyone would just be nodding their heads, as they would all be sitting down wondering what was going to be happening. As all of this happening, All Might would then tell them, Alright, you all can get up, grab your briefcases, and head down to the locker rooms. Please get changed quite quickly. I wouldn't have to make a lot of people wait, since we are going to be doing another team activity. Aizawa wanted to see how far your teamwork abilities have gone since the first day here at your hero school. So we're going to be doing a teamwork activity called the Heroes vs. Villains assignment. How this works is two teams will face off against each other of two. These two people will either be on a team of the heroes or of the villains. The villains will be going into a just building to hide a paper mache device, courtesy of the support course, of course, and the heroes will have 15 minutes to find that device or capture all of the villains. So please head back down to the locker rooms, get changed, and go to City Site C, as that is where I'm going to be waiting for you all. As all of this would be happening, all of the students would rush off in pure excitement as they couldn't hold their just happiness and excitement, as it was their first hero class after all. They just couldn't wait, as all of them would finally make their way down to where it was after getting changed into their hero costume. All Might would then sort of laugh. Wow, that's quite record time. I see all of you are quite excited to start your journey as a hero. So I already decided what the first two teams were going to be, as I saw what had actually helped me decide that. As I saw was actually here gonna be watching you too, since he did make the notes for what happened on the first day. So the first team will be Izuku and Bakugo versus Uraraka and, let me think here, Ida. As this would be happening, both Izuku and Bakugo would end up walking over to each other as Izuku would start to think of a plan. So since Ida has sort of a speed quirk and Uraraka's gravity quirk, I think we should possibly try to stay our distance, as Ida could quite easily outspeed us, and get to us quite quickly, so if we keep our distance, he's not going to be able to attack. And since Uraraka needs to touch us in order to make us anti-gravity, she's not going to be too much of use if she's at a distance either. So all of this would be happening. All Might would hand the villain team the device and tell them they have 5 minutes to head in to the building. As Izuku and Bakugo were thinking of their plan, All Might would tell them that the 5 minutes for the villain team had expired and that they may now head into the building. Izuku would put his hand out in front of Bakugo. They probably put it up on the top floor. I suggest we go up to the roof, but we'd have to find a quiet way to do this. As Izuku would end up just activating his frog quirk that he had copied from Asui, as he would end up telling Bakugo to grab onto his back, as he would then stick his hands onto the wall, as he would then slowly climb up the wall, as Asui would end up being watching that. Well, I guess he copied my quirk after all. I think that's quite a useful way to use it, being able to get on top of the roof, as all of them would be watching the fight as they would then make it up to the top. I think we should blindside them and just make sure they don't know we're coming. If we're able to attack them without their knowledge, it'd be quite easy for us to win. As Bakugo would nod his head, as Izuku would then activate an ice quirk that he had copied from Todoroki, as Izuku would put his hand down on the roof, as ice particles would end up forming around Izuku's hand, as Izuku would end up jolting his hand forward, as a massive just iceberg would end up appearing just out of nowhere, as Ida and Uraraka would look on in shock, being completely overwhelmed by the ice. So that should take care of them, as Izuku would tell Bakugo to explode the roof, as Bakugo would do so, as chunks of roof would fly just in every direction. They would end up seeing a small divot in the massive ice chunk that Izuku had formed. As Izuku would just sort of laugh. That's my bad, I probably shouldn't have gone for such a strong type of ice. As Izuku would start to just use his fire quirk as a flamethrower to destroy the ice, melting it around, as finally the ice would be all melted, leaving Ida and Uraraka still shocked, as both Izuku and Bakugo would jump in, completely just taking them out, grabbing them by their necks, knocking them out with ease, tying them up, as both Izuku and Bakugo would touch the hands on the device. As All Might would come over the intercom and congratulations, Team Heroes! Please carry Team Villains back up to us. As both Izuku and Bakugo would grab two people, carrying them back up, as Recovery Girl who's on site would check them, making sure that they were okay. All Might would ask anybody if they could tell what what the two had done very well, as Momo would raise her hand, saying that they had done quite well in the teamwork aspect, as it still shows that they have the extensive knowledge of how to be a team. As All Might would just sort of laugh, saying, yeah, I guess it really does show who's been just friends for quite a while and who's been using their quirks together after quite a long time. As every one of the teams would end up finishing, All Might would end up walking into the classroom after dismissing everyone, as Izuku was still sitting there talking with both Bakugo and Uraraka. All Might would wait for their conversation to end, as they would stand up saying hello All Might before walking out back to their class, or back to their house, as Izuku would stand up with them. However, All Might would stop him. Hello, young Midoriya. I actually have a question for you. I've been meaning to ask you, as I haven't seen you in quite a while. As Izuku would look on, just with a look of confusion towards All Might. What do you mean, All Might? I remember seeing you that day after saving you from the Sludge villain. I remember seeing you save young Bakugo Katsuki from such Sludge villain. As All Might would end up bringing Izuku back to his private office, where he would then sit him down, pouring a cup of tea. I've been meaning to ask you, Izuku. Do you think you could become my successor? Izuku would look confused at All Might, saying, your successor? What do you mean? As Izuku would sort of catch the hint. You know, All Might, you can't just give someone your quirk. That's not possible. As All Might would just sort of awkwardly laugh. Well, it kind of is possible with my quirk. As Izuku would look on confused. What do you mean? This is confusing me, All Might. As All Might would just say, so, I'll give you the story. Many years ago, man was born with a quirk called All for One, allowing him to steal quirks of others while also giving those quirks to other people. This caused him to build up an army of supporters after helping them with their endeavors. And so, he ended up being a very villainous person. For his brother was said to be quirkless, however he had a useless quirk that allowed him to pass quirks on to others. And so his brother gave him a stockpiling quirk, and the two quirks merged, and that gave us all, one for all, my quirk, and it's been passed on for generations trying to stop All for One, and I believe you can be the person to do it. Izuku would think long and hard before shaking his head. I don't think I can do that, All Might. There's probably someone much more in need of that quirk, and right now, I don't think I need it. I'd possibly become too arrogant if I were to become so much strong. With something like that, being a quirk like that, I don't think I could take it, as I already have quite the powerful quirk after all, and I just don't think I need it. As All Might would look sadly down at Izuku before saying he'll give him some time to think about it, as it's quite the tough decision. Izuku would nod his head. However, Izuku, before he would walk out, he would turn to All Might. You know, All Might, I could help you find someone who would be quite useful to the quirk and would possibly be able to use the quirk to a much fuller extent. As Izuku would say, I'll help you with your journey to finding someone to use your quirk, All Might. As All Might would have nodded his head, thanking Izuku, as Izuku would walk out, as he would end up walking back to his house, as his friends had met at his house actually after going to their own houses, as their parents had told them that they needed to get ready as they were all going to a dinner at the Midoriya's. As Izuku would walk in late, still wearing his UA uniform, Inko would ask where he had been. Izuku would say the teacher wanted to speak with him after class, as Izuku would sit down eating on the dinner that his mother had prepared for him. As all of them would be talking, with the parents just congratulating the three on making it into UA, and how they have heard from their teacher through emails how well they've been doing, and that they're the top of the class. As Izuku would just say, yeah, guess we've been doing quite well. It actually shows that we probably have some of the highest level of experience with teamwork there. Everyone's still kind of not well using it yet. As the parents would just sort of laugh, as all of this would end up being happening, with many of them just sharing embarrassing stories about when the kids were young. Once they had finished their dinner, they would go up to Izuku's room just to play video games and talk about what their endeavors and journeys through UA were going to be like. As finally Bakugo would end up bringing up the conversation. So, who do you think's going to be the number one hero out of all of us? As Izuku would just sort of laugh. That's quite the question, Bakugo. I don't think any of us can answer that just yet. We're still only in our first month at UA, after all. Bakugo would just sort of laugh before urging Izuku on. Oh, come on. Please, Izuku, I know damn well you're confident you'd be the number one hero out of all of us. Well, I mean, you're not wrong about that. Since I can't just copy anyone's quirk after seeing it, I could easily copy your quirk and be just as powerful as you. I could even copy a weakness of yours and do that. So that basically means I'm stronger than you. As Bakugo would then sort of just laugh. Well, don't forget you can also copy anyone's techniques after all. So I guess you would be the best out of all of us. That doesn't mean we wouldn't become one of the best hero trios after all. Izuku would nod his head as the night would end up ending, as all of them would come into school the next day, wondering what just trials and things they'd go through their next day at UA and all the different sorts of training and friends they'd end up making along the way to their path being a hero. Good morning, Class 1A, the Hero 13 would yell from the top of a massive staircase as the Class 1A would pile out of the bus that they had just hopped on around an hour before. As Uraraka would see 13, she would start fangirling as that was her favorite hero. She had idolized her and wanted to be like her, just like how Izuku and Bakugo wanted to be like All Might. As she would just be jumping up and down, excited, wondering if she would be able to talk with 13 and just explain how much of just fan she's been ever since she first saw and heard about who 13 was. However, before any of that could happen, Aizawa would just say, "Alright, class, that is the rescue hero known as 13. Please walk up there while I take some attendance from back here, just making sure everyone got out of the bus. While you walk up there, she will start to explain what you will be doing," Aizawa would say, as all of them would walk up the staircase where they would then see the hero 13, as she would then explain everything. Opening one of the massive doors, she would then just motion as if just showing for them to enter the building. As the class would enter, they would marvel at how massive the USJ dome circular building was, as 13 would just laugh. This place took quite a while to build, exactly 2 years in fact, and that was with the help of the cement hero, and also happens to work here at UA. But anyway, this facility was designed for search and rescue things. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be hiding different types of things around, like rocks with paintings on them, or just bright yellow-colored things or cylinders that have text in them that give you clues on where other things could be. It's just sort of a training exercise that's also supposed to be fun. So that's what we're going to be doing today. As Aizawa would then catch up, opening the door, as they would then get a time to just chat with each other before being told that they now have 2 minutes to decide which groups they wanted to be in to be separated into the different areas. As all of them were talking, one person would be having their eyes and gaze drift down towards the center of the USJ building. What is that? As many random-looking people would start piling out of this purplish portal this person saw, as finally they would decide to speak up. "Hey, I can't believe it, they even have fake villains here! This place is everything!" The young hero in training would say, as both Aizawa and 13 would be alarmed by this. Fake villains? There's never been fake villains here, as Aizawa would rush to the front, where he would then look down the massive staircase leading down to the main plaza. He would see the portal opening up and having just thousands of villains step out from this portal. He would yell for all of the class to get out of the building, as those aren't fake, those are real villains. They could be risking their lives if they stay any bit longer in here. As 13 would try to open the door to motion for the students to get out, the blue-haired person standing just at the back of all the villain army would then speak. "Oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Anyone who steps out of that door will have met instant death." As 13, not trusting that, would end up grabbing a rock that just happened to be sitting on the staircase from when the last class had left the USJ. Throwing it out, it would then just easily pass through. Shigaraki would then just give an evil laugh. I guess you caught my bluff. Kurogiri, why don't you go just block the doors so they can't escape? As Kurogiri would do this, Shigaraki would then laugh once more. I happened to see the main person we're here, All Might, and just decided not to show his ugly face. So we might as well just take care of a couple of his precious students while we're at it. As Kurogiri, while standing right by the doors blocking them, would open up a portal beneath many of the students, causing them to fall down into the portal, just spreading them out throughout the different areas. As all of this was happening, Izuku would fall right through the portal, as he would end up finding himself in the flood zone. As he would look around, he would see one of his classmates falling down from the sky, as he would reach out, catching the purple blob that was Mineta. Izuku would put him down before asking Mineta if he had seen anyone from above when he was staring directly down at the ship. He would say he saw some of his classmates at the back of the ship, as Izuku would end up walking back, but fully not trusting what Mineta had said. As Izuku would peer around the corner, he would end up seeing a villain approaching one of his classmates. As Izuku would appear from right behind the villain, exploding an explosion right into the villain's face, sending him flying back into the water, just charred and burnt as a crisp. As Izuku, who had just saved Asui, they would then start to think of a plan. Izuku wasn't quite sure of what plan they could possibly apply this, as Izuku would end up just asking both of them what their quirks were. Izuku, of course, knew what Asui and both Mineta's quirks were, but he wanted to know their full extent of their abilities, and if they had any special powers that Izuku wasn't sure about. So, as Izuku was asking this, they would then explain, as Izuku would start to create a small plan. As Izuku was thinking, he would up just freezing the lake beneath him, drawing massive amounts of attention from the villain crowd, which would indirectly help Aizawa defeat the just the distracted crowd easier, as they weren't focused on Aizawa as much. These weren't professional villains. They weren't they weren't training to be villains to kill other people. They were just doing it because they got just told and brought into this massive warehouse and said they'd be getting a reward if they were to just go along with the wishes of whoever was telling them their orders. So they really just weren't the best well-trained people, like sort of an army and a military. So this would help Aizawa, as all of them would step down onto the completely solid ice, as they would end up walking across the lake, though it was still super slippery. So they would make it across, they would end up hiding behind a rock, as Shigaraki was still focused on Aizawa, who by now had taken out the entire army of villains. As Aizawa would look on towards the center, he would see Shigaraki just standing there slowly clapping, as Shigaraki would start to take steps forward. Congratulations, Aizawa. It appears you were able to beat my army of villains. Well, that doesn't matter. Shigaraki would snap his fingers as Kurogiri would motion and nodding his head as he would open up a portal right beside Shigaraki, as a massive, just purplish bird monster would step out before it would give off a screech that echoed throughout this just dome-shaped building, as it was perfect echoing, letting everyone know that the Nomu had arrived, as all of the villains who have heard it would look towards the center before smiling, as many of these Class 1A students who would end up being fighting these villains would pause too, as the villains would then talk to them. Oh, that thing's here. You all don't stand a chance against it. It's gonna kill all of you. Just when I thought we were losing to these brats, we actually found our saving grace. Thank God. As all of this was happening, Nomu screeching would rush out, having been told by Shigaraki to kill Aizawa, and then to go around the USJ, killing the rest of the students as well. As he would rush off towards Aizawa would try to dodge it to continue on rushing towards Shigaraki. However, the Nomu would block Aizawa's dodge by making a clothesline, as Aizawa would just be completely flattened, sending him flying down, as the Nomu towering above All Might would just release massive amounts of punches right down into Aizawa, completely just destroying and shattering the bones beneath Aizawa's skin and flesh, as the Nomu would pick up Aizawa by the head as his body would sway limply, as he would then throw Aizawa into the stairs, making a crater within them, as Aizawa would lay completely unconscious, as blood would start to trickle down the stairs, slowly flowing back down towards the downhill area. As all of this was happening, Izuku would realize that the Nomu was now searching for a new target. In order to buy time, he would tell both of his classmates that they need to find a way to escape, as Izuku would jump out, rushing towards the Nomu using his explosions. As both of his classmates would try to jump in to hold him back, however, he would yell for them to run away, deciding to be the hero and not just let all of them die. As he would rush in, he would tell them to spread the word. They would nod their heads as Izuku would rush in before kicking the Nomu square in the face. However, the Nomu didn't seem to be fazed at all by this. Oh, it appears one of those UA brats happened to join the party. Well, no matter. Nomu, kill that damn brat. As the Nomu would give off another screech, as it would then just charge fully on at Izuku had jumped back, using the momentum of his kick to make distance between him and the bird monster. As all of this was happening, Izuku would feel massive hands grip around his face, as his face would then be slammed into one of the Nomu's knees, as Izuku would then fall down to the ground, barely holding himself up, as it had completely shattered, breaking his nose, as he was sitting there, as blood would just drip right out of his nose, flowing out of it like a river, as Izuku would hold his nose shut, just wondering how the hell could something be so strong, as Izuku would look up, his gaze now just dizzy and blurry, as everything seemed around him just to be spinning, as Izuku would then drop completely unconscious, looking like he had just died from a single blow to the knee, and from a blow from a knee to the head, as Izuku would then just be sitting there, as he would just be unconscious. However, as he would end up waking up, jolting up after hearing just ticks of a clock, as the ticking would continue, getting faster and faster as time would continue on passing, as Izuku would be staring up at the ceiling of the USJ. However, it didn't look like the USJ. Sure, it was in the same shape, but everything seemed to be ruined and as if it had been completely destroyed by something, as Izuku would be holding his head, just groaning in pain after having it being smashed in by a knee, as Izuku would pull himself up, still holding his head, as he would finally stand up, going to take a step forward, still looking around above him and everywhere else, as his foot would connect with something, as Izuku would look down as he would see the limp, dead body of many of his classmates standing before him, as all of the villains that Aizawa had defeated are gone, and there only stood his classmates and the rest of his teachers and friends that he had met along the way, as Izuku would just shake his head saying, What the hell is this place? This can't be real. This can't be real, right? Izuku would say, now laughing as if he was about to go insane, holding his head now with both hands, gripping his hair. He just couldn't believe what his eyes were telling him. As he would look around, stepping over the limp bodies around him, he would look around as everything just seemed to be barren. He would walk up the staircase as it had just been completely flattened. The ruins just barely there, having Izuku to be only skipping up a couple stairs to even walk up the dang staircase. As Izuku would open the door, he would end up seeing fires all around him as sirens would blare in the distance. As Izuku would fall back down into the now shut door, just wondering, what the hell? Is this my fault? Why couldn't I have saved them? As Izuku's body would push against the doors, he would fall completely backwards. However, he would then completely continue on falling as if he was now falling into a void. As his body would then jolt up as the ticking of the clock would stop after completely going at insane speeds, making him go insane. As Izuku would jolt up, the ticking of the clock would stop. Izuku holding his head, looking around, just seeing that everything was still alright and was okay. He couldn't comprehend what he had just saw. Was it the use of a quirk? No, that can't be. Everything he saw looked so real. That couldn't be something that a quirk could do. It just couldn't be. However, before Izuku could think any further, a fist would collide right with the side of his head, drilling the fist square into him, as Izuku's head would be slammed down into the stairs behind him. As Izuku's body would lay limply there, as Izuku's eyes would remain still active, looking around as the Nomu would shriek in victory, as he would rush around looking for more of his classmates. As Izuku would see the Nomu grab a couple of his classmates that had made their way to the center, wondering still what was going on, still in all of the confusion. As Izuku would motion with his shaky hand as if trying to yell out to them to run away, but he just couldn't. He couldn't speak. As the Nomu would bash them into each other, slamming them down into the ground after that, completely decimating them. As the Nomu would rush around the USJ, as Izuku would try to get up. However, right as he would, a hand would grab his chin, pulling it up. Oh, still trying to continue on fighting, I see. Maybe you should give up after all. You know you can't win. That Nomu here, it's been specially designed for victory. It can beat even All Might. So you, a puny little UA brat, you couldn't even beat it. Not even with 1% of its power, you couldn't beat it. That's just how strong it is and weak you are. As Izuku would then feel the hand of his chin, as Izuku's head would fall down back into his chest. As all of a sudden Izuku would feel that same falling, as he would fall down through a portal, where he would then end up finding himself into a damp cellar-looking basement thing. As Izuku would be sitting there, he would look around, seeing bars all around him, as he was so confused what was happening. As Izuku just couldn't comprehend everything. As we cut back to the USJ, as All Might pulls up, smashing the doors open, seeing the Nomu screeching around, rushing in, smashing two of the students together, as All Might would rush in, jumping past Shigaraki, slamming his fist right into the Nomu as the All Might fight then begins. However, we cut back to Izuku, now hours after the USJ event had occurred, as Shigaraki would be walking down the damp hallways as the dripping from the water that had rained last night down into a puddle below would sound echoing throughout the cellar. So is this the boy you were talking about? Yes, it is. A strange-looking voice, yet familiar, would say. Izuku would be confused as he remembered hearing that voice years ago. As the two people would step into view, someone wearing a doctor's coat, while there obviously was Shigaraki. So this is the boy you said had a perfect copy, Quirk. One that would either make a great Nomu, or a type of villain, yes. Oh, yes, but I don't think he's going to become a villain anytime soon. The face of joy he had when I told him what type of quirk he had, and how powerful it was just pure excitement. I know he'd do everything in his power to go back to his hero life. As Shigaraki would then just laugh. Oh, I don't think he's going to be going to that anytime soon. As Shigaraki would be laughing at that, we now cut to a just break room, as a long desk or a long just table would be there, as UA staff was sitting there just... Oh my gosh, how could we lose a student? This just doesn't make any sense. And of course, it just happens to be one of our best students here, in all of UA, in fact, not just in the first year category. How could we lose one of them? All Might would yell, as Nezu would yell for All Might to quiet down, sipping a glass of his tea as we would then start to think. We have to bring in his mother. We might have to tell some of the students as well. I just warn. I hope this doesn't get out to the public, but I know it will. This is gonna be really bad over the next couple of weeks. Hopefully we can get some better publicity when these students just graduate and become some of the best heroes. As all of this would end up being happening, as they just couldn't comprehend losing a student. Finally, the door would slam open as Inko would end up crying out, "Where's my baby? What did you do to him?" As Nezu would walk up to her, grabbing her hand before guiding her to a chair. "Miss Midoriya, you gotta settle down. We're still trying to find young Izuku, but it might take a couple of days." Inko would end up screaming at them. How could they? She knew it would be risky letting her son into a hero school, but this is all he talked about for years. She couldn't just trust herself anymore. How could she do this to herself? She let this happen, letting Izuku into the school of his dreams. As Inko would then shake her head before rushing out of the door, not even being in the same room as them for not even a minute. As all of the teachers would look down in sadness. As the next day, all of the students would walk into class, as they would notice an empty desk, as that desk had never been empty before. It was the class's happiest person. He was always happy to be there, happy to be training, never was just complaining about any training or anything, always wanted to be doing better and better. And yet he was gone. He'd never miss a day of school in his life. Why would he be gone? As Aizawa would walk into the classroom, looking down sadly, as his injuries had been mostly healed by Recovery Girl, but yet he still had bandages mostly over his body. I'm not sure how I can tell you this, class. It's quite hard for me, and I'm gonna assume most of you. But your classmate, Izuku Midoriya, he's missing. I know some of you may notice that he wasn't on the bus ride home yesterday after all of those events, just assuming that he'd gotten picked up by one of his parents like some of the others had. But we haven't been able to locate him since that. The last hiding of him was him telling Yuasu and Mineta to save some of the other students. We're not quite sure where to go from here, but just please try to forget about him and erase him from your memory. Bakugo would stand up yelling at Aizawa. "How the hell could you say something like that? He was one of your students, one of our friends. You can't just tell us to forget about him completely. You're insane," Bakugo would yell. As he would stand up, as many of the other classmates would stand up as well, siding with Bakugo. As Aizawa just stand up fully yelling for all of them to sit down. "I know it's going to be hard for you, but you just got to understand. You got to accept the fact you may never see him again." As Aizawa would be saying this before telling them that they're now dismissed for a month while they go upgrade security and all of that. As many of the students would leave, just wondering what had happened to their friend and classmate Izuku Midoriya. Meanwhile, Izuku, sitting in a cellar, would end up having Shigaraki walk into the prison. "So, we meet again, Izuku Midoriya. I suspect you overheard the conversation with your previous Quirk doctor. Well, I know you won't become a villain at all, but I'll just have to do something about that. However, I'd just like to tell you that we may or may not have your mother tied up right now, and I'll let you go to the sports festival and make everything seem like you're fine. I know UA is probably panicking right now about the bad publicity they'll be getting, so I'll let you go back there. However, I'll just have to install this device into your neck area, and if you are to say anything about this or never come back if you never come back after 2 months, this exact location, I'll be forced to shock you, completely killing you instantly, and nobody will know how, as it'd be completely undetectable unless I were to remove it myself. So I suggest you get going now. Wouldn't have your mother be worried anymore." As Izuku would nod his head, standing up, glaring at Shigaraki, as Shigaraki would have handcuffs around Izuku's arms and legs just so he wouldn't try to pull anything. As he would then open the door, releasing Shigaraki's handcuffs, as Shigaraki would then just show off the remote with a massive red button on it. "Remember, Izuku, don't try any funny business or else I might have to kill you. That thing happens to have a happens to have an audio recording device on it, so everything you say I can hear. And I'll be having someone monitor it 24/7. So just know, don't cross me, Izuku, or else your entire family, friends, along with yourself will all be decimated under my hands. As Izuku would nod his head before walking back to his house. As the rain would start pouring onto Izuku, Izuku would sit down onto a bench, not knowing what area of just the world he was in. He could be in any country or city and country he lived in. He just had no clue. Sitting down, he would stare up into the clouds as lightning would strike in the distance. How could he have been so weak? How could I have done this? Now I'm gonna have to go back. At least I'll just share secrets to those damn villains. How could I become something like this? I'm becoming something I swore to destroy. No. Why? As a bus would pull up, as Izuku would step in before dropping $1 into the jar. As the bus driver would ask him where he wanted to go, as Izuku would say, do you happen to know where Izuku would say the location of his house was, as no one else was on the bus? Yeah, I'll take you there. As Izuku would sit down, just wondering what was next for his life. As a month would end up passing, Izuku would continue on his training, as Izuku would walk into UA wearing his uniform, having gotten it cleaned up and even sewed back together from when it had been damaged. However, that was his hero costume. He had actually left his UA uniform back in the locker rooms, so he would end up having a replica made, so he would end up walking into the classroom, sitting down as early as possible, as his classmates would end up walking in, as many of them would notice the strange figure sitting down at Izuku's desk. Finally, someone would walk over to Izuku, saying that no one's allowed to sit in that desk. The last person to sit in it was Izuku. However, as Izuku would look up, as the green eyes would meet the person yelling down at Izuku, everyone would just gasp. There was their classmate, one that they hadn't heard about or just heard from in a month, as Bakugo would turn around, slamming down his hand right into Izuku's desk. He would yell at Izuku, "What the hell, Izuku? You expect us to be shocked after you just disappear for a month? The hell could you do something so idiotic?" As Izuku would just awkwardly laugh. Well, that's a bit my bad, Bakugo. I'm not actually quite sure about it either. I just remember blacking out and waking up in my bed. And what do you know, a month had passed, so, yeah, I'm kind of confused about the whole thing, too. I think it was possibly the work of a villain or something, Izuku would say. Meanwhile, back at the villain base, Shigaraki, listening to it, would be smiling. Oh, he's playing right into our hands. As All For One would then laugh after listening what Shigaraki had said, and also the audio recording. Yes, he is, Shigaraki. Yes, he is. If you think about it, this whole town, just life is basically just a game of cards. If you play them right, you'll be on top of the world. But if you don't, you'll be down in the depths of hell. So, hopefully you play your cards right and don't screw this up. Because, you know, as soon as you go of this kid out of your grasp, you're done for. Shigaraki would then laugh. Oh, he's not getting away from us anytime soon, All For One. As For One would just say, oh, I hope you're right, Shigaraki. As all of this would be happening, Aizawa would walk in as he would see Izuku before just nodding, saying, "Welcome back, Izuku. I expected your return after getting that phone call from your mother last night." As Izuku would just nod his head, as Aizawa would then start to speak with all of them about what the sports festival is going to be. As all of this would end up just stopping, they would hop on a bus going into the Sports Festival Coliseum. And this class is the Sports Festival Coliseum, where you all will be participating in the UA Sports Festival for around the next 4 hours. It's going to be quite tiresome for you all, so I suggest getting quite the rest while you're in the waiting room. All of them would nod their heads as they would be seated down after getting changed into their sports festival uniforms. Finally, after a couple minutes of waiting, Midnight, the announcer, would call them out onto the field, as the doors would creak open as they would then walk out as the crowd would just cheer, "There it is, Class 1A." As that's what they were waiting for. They were waiting for the most highly just Class 1A. That's what got them excited. Every class like 2A and 3A got them excited, but these are heroes they've never seen before, making them even more excited than that. As all of them would be cheering in excitement, as they would then ask for the first-year representative to walk up. Izuku would walk up before asking everyone for a good fight, as he would then walk back down. Well, with that out of the way, why don't I explain the first event? This just happens to be a race where you all will have to go around 3 different obstacles, as all of them would nod their heads. 3 different obstacles they'd have to get around, and that's how all easy it'd be. However, there's a twist. In this race, you have to capture 3 of the villains, courtesy to some volunteers at the local hero agencies. You have to capture 3 of these villains and carry them on your back to the finish line after crossing the finish line once. And you have to help out your fellow people that haven't crossed the finish line to get there and then come back so that they can capture theirs as well. So I suggest we get back to it, as every one of the people would be pushed into these small cramped hallways as they would hear a loud "go" yell over the loudspeaker, as pushing and shoving would then ensue, as Izuku would easily get out first, as he would end up looking around as he would see a massive zero-pointer standing above him, looking down onto him. As Izuku would look into the distance, he would see where the zero-pointer's legs were, while also seeing a massive army of robots that had been used during the hero exam, as Izuku would explode off using Bakugo's Quirk. With the explosions, he would then land onto the ground using Todoroki's ice to go even faster with the already forward momentum of the explosions. As Izuku would be going at insanely high speeds, Izuku would end up using explosions just as boosters to continue on going, as Izuku would make a ramp with the ice as he would then launch up into the air, going right over the zero-pointer. As there waiting for him was a massive amount of just fake villains that had been volunteers from the local hero agencies. "Oh, there they are!" many of them would scream as they would then launch up into the air using not their quirks but different sorts of weapons that UA had provided them, as they would all be launching up using grappling hooks, grabbing onto the back of the zero-pointer. Izuku would see this as he would then step on some of their heads, propelling himself right over the bunch of them. As Izuku would easily, with how high he was, get right over the last 2 events, easily crossing the finish line. As Izuku would turn around, he would end up seeing many of them still charging at him, as Izuku would then grab one of their faces before slamming them down into the minefield that was below him, as the mines would then explode, sending many of them flying backwards. Izuku would look around as he would see still many of them charging at him, as Izuku would then freeze all of their feet around them, completely making them solid to the ground. As Izuku would slam an explosion down into the ground, the mines below them would start to explode, sending all of them flying up into the air, causing an even bigger distraction as Izuku would grab 3 of them before pulling them across the finish line, as Izuku would be given first place. Not far behind him, Bakugo would cross the finish line, and seeing what Izuku had done, Bakugo just wouldn't do any of that, completely just exploding all of the people around him, including just in their face area, before grabbing 2 of the people's heads, dragging them while one of them was over his shoulder, as he would cross the finish line in second, while many of their other classmates would end up crossing the finishing line as well. As all of this would be happening, Izuku would walk into the waiting room, wondering what the second event was going to be. As he looked up onto the screen, seeing many of his classmates finish the race, as he would just smile, knowing that Class 1A was doing exceptionally well. As all of this would be happening, the race would end up finishing as everyone would clear out, or the volunteers would clear out the race area, as all of the people who had passed would walk out onto the field once again. Alright, congratulations to all of you who made it to the second round. So, the second event happens to be, let me see here, as Midnight would turn around before spinning a wheel, as this wheel would end up slowly stopping on. Oh, wow, you guys have to defeat number one. You guys have to defeat one of the top and heroes altogether, and anyone who gets knocked out or captured is out. Ooh, that could be good. As Midnight would then smile, the hero would then end up walking in. It happened to be the hero known as Gang Orca, as they would end up jumping into the center. So, I guess I'm going to be having to face up against these UA kids, huh? As Midnight would then nod her head, as he would then laugh. Hopefully you all can make this interesting. As Midnight would end up yelling, it is now beginning, as all of them would have bounty markers on their head, as this was to signify that you could get points. Each hit you landed onto Gang Orca landed you 10 points. However, if you were to get hit back, that minuses 20 points from your total, as each one of them had been given an electronic device that they were to wear around their wrist or leg, which kept their track of points. The higher they placed, the bigger amount of points. However, there was also a bounty. If you were to knock out someone with points or higher points than you, that's how many points would be added to your total. However, if you were to knock out someone with lower points than you, that's how many negative points you would get towards your total. So you basically had to think about it smart. However, Izuku had the biggest bounty on his hands. Everyone knew he got first because of how loud President Mike and Midnight had screamed when Izuku had passed. Everyone knew that Izuku, the green-haired boy, had first place and he had the most amount of points. So everyone would end up staring at him. However, as the match would begin with everyone glaring towards Izuku, jumping at him, Gang Orca would take this opportunity, steamrolling through many of them, easily attacking many of them, even capturing a lot of them, as Izuku knew it'd be best just to conceal himself away from everyone, as time would end up expiring, as Izuku would end up seeing a purple-haired kid's talking to people, as they would end up going mindless, obeying all of his just wishes, as Izuku would end up copying this kid's quirk, as anyone who would come close to him, Izuku would make them speak, as they would then talk back to him, as Izuku would just cause them to run away, protecting him, basically acting as bodyguards, so that Izuku could stay back, not using his energy for the final, just the final event. So as all of this would come to an end, Izuku would be stretching, waiting for the final event to be announced. So, as all of this was happening, Midnight would come up onto the podium, as she would then announce the final event. Congratulations, every student that has made it on to this point. The final event will be a 1v1 tournament. So, and the first match is going to be up against, let's see here, Izuku Midoriya versus Shinso. As this would be happening, Izuku would end up walking up onto the podium, or onto the arena that had been newly constructed, as the match would begin. Before Shinso could speak, Izuku would start asking Shinso questions. I've never seen you before. Are you someone from one of the general classes? As Shinso, not thinking anything of it, would answer, however, as his eyes would end up going dull, as Izuku would then say, "Why don't you take a step out of the arena onto that soft grass, will ya?" As Shinso would turn around, taking a step out onto the soft grass, as Midnight would immediately yell, "And that's a ring-out victory!" As Izuku would cancel his just quirk usage from Shinso, as he would end up waking up from just what had happened, as he would look on to see his foot was out of bounds. What the hell? How the hell did that happen? As Midnight would end up just being just as confused as Shinso, along with the crowd. As the next event, or the next fight for Izuku, would end up being said that he is going up against Confronting Bakugo, as Izuku would then smile. As he would walk up onto the arena, he would then end up putting his fist out. So, Bakugo, I guess this means whoever wins this fight's gonna make it on to the finale. As Bakugo would nod his head, yeah, I guess so. As Izuku would end up stretching, he would end up hearing that the match had begun. Izuku would see Bakugo launch off straight at him, as Izuku would do the same, completely copying all of Bakugo's movements, however, just opposite. If Bakugo threw a left hook, Izuku would throw a right hook, canceling that out, blocking the other, as both of their punches would be blocked, as Izuku would continue on doing this. So I guess you're gonna continue on copying me, huh? Izuku would say the same right back towards Bakugo, as Bakugo would then sort of laugh. However, while he was distracted doing this, Izuku would break away from this before slamming his elbow into Bakugo's cheek, as Bakugo would be and a couple feet the other way, as Bakugo would turn his head violently, glaring back at Izuku, just blindsided by what Izuku had done. Izuku would punch Bakugo square in the face again. Come on, Bakugo, why don't you put up a better fight? As Bakugo would just sort of laugh, oh sure. As Bakugo would then explode off right back at Izuku, slamming both of his wrists together before slamming a massive explosion into Izuku. However, before any of that could be happening, Izuku would put up a wall of water, and as soon as the explosion hit the wall of water, it would end up instantly being dulled out by the water. Izuku would smile, knowing that he had won, as the water would then crash down into Bakugo, with the force sending Bakugo flying out of the arena, slamming him back into the padded wall. As Izuku would be declared the victor due to a ring-out victory, Izuku would then step up on to the semi-finals, where he would then see his opponent. It was Ochako Uraraka. She had been on the other side of the bracket side that he had been on, as Izuku would then smile, wishing her luck as the match would begin. Izuku would rush off to her, however, before he would peel off before slamming his foot into the ground, launching it back as if pointing right at Uraraka. Uraraka would be confused by Izuku's movements, however, an iceberg would then shoot up right into Uraraka's feet, completely concealing her, as the block of ice would form beneath her, as she couldn't shatter it, as she would punch it, trying to make it just shatter and break, thinking that it was possibly weak. It wouldn't, as she would touch it with all 5 fingers, hoping that it would just break after going up. However, that was a lapse in judgment, as she would start to float up, as the heavier block of ice would lift her up, as she would then be upside down. As Izuku would wind his fist back, punching her square in the face, she would then just continue on doing this as if she was a punching bag, as Izuku, after 2 hits, would end up knocking her out cleanly, just so she wouldn't have to deal with any more punches going right to her face. As Izuku would then hear the crowd just scream in excitement, he would end up being told that he is now in the final round, the finale. As Izuku would be smiling to himself, he would walk up onto the arena, as he would end up staring off towards his other opponent. There it was, Class 1B's Monima, the other kid with the copy quirk. He had used the copying to his advantage and caused other people to just get confused by it. So with the confusion, he had made himself all the way up to the finals. This is it, Izuku. As soon as I beat you, I'll be moved up into Class 1A, and you'll be moved down. As Izuku just sort of laughed. Oh, I'm sure. As the round would begin, Monima would end up launching off towards Izuku, using one of the quirks that he had copied from the last round. However, Izuku would dodge this before elbowing the kid right in the neck, as he would end up being sent right down to the ground from its momentum, as his face would skid across the pavement, as the skin would slowly start to heal, as scabs or just cuts and scrapes would be all over his face. He would get up glaring at Izuku before yelling that was a stupid cheap shot, as he would rush in going for a punch that were easily shown just be too... it had no technique behind it, as Izuku would easily dodge all of these, as he would then wind his fist back, punching right across the face. Please, you're just embarrassing yourself. If you really want to be in Class 1A, you gotta learn proper technique. This is just embarrassment. As Izuku would punch him right across the face before slamming his fist into the top of his head as he would come collapsing down, completely being knocked out. Izuku would smile brightly as the crowd would cheer in excitement. Izuku had just gotten first in the UA Sports Festival. As she would be smiling brightly, would be sad just sitting down below him as he had gotten second. That was one of his last chances to prove to everyone that he was better than Izuku. However, with his loss, which was an easy defeat from Izuku, it showed that he clearly wasn't ever going to be stronger than him unless he spent hours upon hours of his time training just to beat a singular person. As all of the classes would walk back to the bus bay as they would head on to the bus and would then be dropped off back at the UA school building. There were still a couple of hours left in the school day, so everyone was just sitting around doing nothing, as Izuku would ask everyone if they wanted to head down to the school pool just for a fun day to just spend time at the pool, and it would actually be great as a training exercise. All of the students would agree as they would look towards Aizawa, who would just throw them a key that happened to be the pool to the school's pool. Alright, go knock yourselves out. I honestly couldn't really care less. There's actually swimsuits in your locker already. We were actually going to be doing some type of pool thing anyway, so I'll just let you all do that. As all of them would rush off to the locker rooms, get changed into their UA swimsuits, as they would then head off to where the pool was. Once they would all arrive there, Izuku would say they should probably do some races. Meanwhile, Shigaraki would just be sitting there listening as someone had called him over. So, what did you want to call me to call? Why'd you call me over here for? Shigaraki, Izuku mentioned something about a pool. What? You're kidding, right? We've been lucky we released him. I can't believe he hasn't showered in that long. Must have just been spending time with his family or something. Somehow I forgot to ask the doctor to make a burial, one that buries itself under a thin layer of skin. No, Shigaraki, you're not getting it. You did make it, and that is... You're blind. A simple shower wouldn't do anything to it. It's only pellets of water, but an entire pool of it, that would completely destroy the device, especially if Izuku got cut in the neck area where it was, and I'm guessing he probably did because of the sports festival. So, I think you're kind of screwed with this one, Shigaraki. Shigaraki would slam his fist down before yelling, "Damn it! We had him within our grasp! We were this close!" We just gotta hope he possibly gets injured before that, which I don't see happening. As Izuku would wait for people to say go, as Izuku's race would then begin. As soon as his neck touched the water, the device would short-circuit, as it would then flow out of the water, as it would then just self-destruct, causing a small bubble to rise up to the surface of the pool. As Izuku would continue on swimming, end up getting first in his just race, as Shigaraki would be sitting there just shaking his head. Now that we don't have him here, we're gonna need to plan an attack to get him back, and possibly get someone else back too. That would actually work quite well. As Shigaraki would look over towards the person, just asking to see if they agreed with him, as the person would just nervously nod his head. Yeah, that would totally work well. Especially if you were able to kidnap him back, we'd possibly be able to do something with his mind through torture, possibly even make him a Nomu. Think about that. That'd be the strongest Nomu you ever had. As Shigaraki would smile, liking that idea, as he would then walk over to where All For One's chamber was after asking Kurogiri to hit a portal under him to send him wherever All For One's warehouse was. As Shigaraki would then tell him what had happened to Izuku before asking him if they can just do another attack on UA to try to get him and other students to come with them. All For One would like Shigaraki's just train of thought and idea and would agree to that, telling them, it's going to be a while until they find the perfect place or just day to attack them. So, while all of this was happening, we see Izuku coming back along with everyone else after they had been told by Aizawa to get back to class as the day was coming to an end. As all of them would go back to class, they would then see a ton of papers there. Alright, you all just have the rest of the day to submit your forms by tomorrow to choose whoever you decide to internship with. So, good luck with that. As Izuku would be doing that, you would then look down to go to Nezu's office, as you would end up being like, what? As you would travel to Nezu's office after reading that at the bottom of one of his papers. So, I read on one of my papers that said to go to your office? Oh, yes, right, Izuku. Well, each year, ever since we've started the sports festival, every person that has gotten first place has the choice to go out with a Quirk license to use their Quirk as a temporary hero. You have that choice if you do want to do it, although it's quite risky, and you could possibly be killed if you do. Izuku would say, deal, I really want to try to get some experience on my own in the hero work and business, I guess. As Nezu would nod his head excitedly before handing him a hero license. Yeah, I thought you'd say so. So I already made you a license. Handing it to Izuku would smile down on it. This is his first chance to show the world what Izuku could be. However, you are going to need to write your hero name down. We haven't actually decided to make hero names for the class yet, or have the class make hero names. So before I do finalize this and print your hero thing down, or your extra one, that actually has your hero name on it, I'm gonna need to know your hero name. Izuku would sit back in his chair before putting his hand to his forehead. That's a tough choice. Well, I do remember being called a copycat in school, so, why don't we go with that? Copycat. It does kind of sound right, or just go right off the tongue, I guess. As Nezu would then smile, writing it down or typing it down onto his computer before he would click the print button, as another Quirk or hero license would be printed out. Here you go, Izuku. As Izuku would look down on it, he would then look at the license. Quirk, perfect copy. Hero name, Copycat. Civilian name, Izuku. Of course, it didn't list his last name just because anyone could use his full name to find out where he lived. So Izuku, smiling down at this, would then be told by Nezu, alright, you have the rest of 2 weeks to go and do all the hero work you want, as that's as much time off we give them for their internships to just be learning with everyone. Just their internship people, I guess, as Izuku would run off down to grab his hero costume as he would put it on before jumping from building top to building top looking for any crime to stop, as Izuku would just running around stopping robberies and all of this, as people would end up just seeing a flying Izuku running around destroying tons of villains. It was just cruel. Izuku would go around easily stopping them with ease. All of them just were expected to get away. There were no heroes or police in sight. And then out of nowhere came Izuku coming in and just cutting their dreams in half. All of that hope just instantly disappearing after seeing Izuku come in and flatten them to the ground with a singular punch. As Izuku would go around and would actually become a local celebrity in the small city that Izuku had decided to go to first. As all over the local news, it would be showing pictures of Izuku jumping around or punching villains or throwing them into the back of cop cars while also talking with heroes. Or police officers and other heroes that had arrived on the scene. As Izuku would just go from small city to small city, building up a name for himself. As Izuku knew in the big market cities where tons of villains were, there was obviously going to be tons of big pro heroes easily taking it out. So if Izuku wanted to get any action, he'd have to go to the small cities where no heroes ever go because it's so far off from any civilization or big police officers or big heroes that would actually be able to save them if they were to get in trouble. However, Izuku had no worries for this, completely being confident in his abilities. So Izuku would just go around to these small cities that no one would go to and would help them, and this would build up a name for Izuku as the people's hero. He wasn't in it about the money money or the fame. He just wanted to save people, and that's what people just loved about Izuku. If you ended up just calling the number that he would hand out to people, which was a cell phone Nezu had given to him, as Izuku would listen to them before going off to their area. Every single time Izuku would go off, handing out the cell phone or telling it to people he saved, asking them to spread the word, as he told them in 2 weeks' time he's actually not going to be able to use it anymore, so he might as well save as many villains as possible. As many of them were confused as why Izuku would always say in 2 weeks' time he'd disappear, as that would end up happening. After 2 weeks, Izuku and the hero Copycat would completely disappear. Everyone predicted if he was dead or not, as even people would rank him in the top 50 heroes, as he would be just saving and defeating so many villains. He would build up points through the ranking system and would end up being in the top 50 by the time the 2 weeks were up. However, midway through his 2 weeks, Izuku would encounter one of his biggest problems yet, and one of the villains that would actually project himself up from being a 220th ranked hero all the way up to being ranked 46th among all heroes. So Izuku would end up just being walking around one day, as he actually had found himself in a big league city. However, it was completely silent. He was on one of the darker sides that really just had no life to it. All the windows and doors were boarded up. Everything just looked abandoned. As Izuku would be walking around looking for any signs of life, as every time he would turn the corner he would be on edge, not knowing if anything would be waiting for him then. As Izuku had built up a name, there were also people already trying to target Izuku, trying to take him down, which comes with fame as it is. As Izuku would be walking around, he would end up hearing just pain. As Izuku couldn't describe it. All he heard were people just yelling out in pain and agony. As Izuku would end up turning the corner, he would end up seeing a pile of people in hero costumes just sitting there all just grueling in agony. As Izuku would look on at the just heinous sight, he couldn't understand who would do something so vile. As Izuku would end up looking beyond that pile, he would see Stain the hero killer with his red eyes glaring directly at Izuku, sending shivers down his spine. Izuku had never felt such an intense form of bloodlust, and just a form of someone wanting to kill him so bad. As Izuku would look on, the hero killer would throw a dagger right at Izuku, as Izuku would barely catch it, as the dagger would be right in between his eyes, barely, just centimeters away from just making contact with Izuku's skin. If it isn't Copycat, if I could remember, you're the... What? Who cares? I've seen you've built up quite the name for yourself as a people's hero. Oh, I'm sure you are. I'm sure you're not in it for the money and fame, after all. Oh, please. All these news stations are just lying about you. You save a couple people here and there, and now all of a sudden you're the people's hero, a shining beam of hope just like All Might. Don't give me that crap. I know who you truly are, hero. I know damn well you're only in it for all the money and fame that you'll end up receiving once you built up an even bigger name for yourself. I could honestly care less, as you're just gonna end up dead just like the rest of these heroes once I'm done with you. As Stain would then launch off directly towards Izuku. As Izuku, right before you were to move at all, you would end up seeing the striking blue hair of one of his classmates. Izuku would recognize it immediately as he would dodge Stain's attack, pushing the side of Stain's head the other way, sending him into the pile of heroes that was now behind Izuku. As Izuku would rush up to Ida, he would ask him if Ida was alright, as Ida would just say, damn it, damn, Stain, as Izuku just could see that Ida just had completely lost it, having been in so much pain, as Izuku would see Ida's metal in his armor had been just pierced. It had been taken off and thrown to the side, as Ida's body had been pierced by blades several times. As Izuku would duck his head, as a dagger would go flying over it. Oh, I guess you're quite the skillful fighter. No wonder you're rising through the ranks so fast. It's a shame I'll have to take you down so easily. As Stain would launch off towards him, gripping his sword in hand, slashing up and down as Izuku would just continue on dodging it. As Izuku would be seeing this, he would end up kicking Stain back. As Stain would let go of his sword, Izuku grabbing it would then charge Stain with the exact same motions. Oh, so I see why now your name is Copycat. Because you can copy people. Oh, that's funny. Too bad you're not going to be able to beat me just mimicking my movements. As Stain would jump off, staggering his movements just in insane ways, as Izuku would do the exact same, following right behind Stain, right on his tail. However, Izuku would mix things up a little bit, making things interesting. As soon as Stain were to land, he would grab the side of the building before launching off to another side. However, as Izuku would go, he would slowly just destroy the buildings around him. Izuku could care less. They were an abandoned part of the city, and he knew damn well no one was ever going to go out there and pick up any mess. So Izuku would decide to have a little fun and would decide to break a couple things. Breaking the walls, as Stain would end up seeing the sheer power in Izuku's kicks launching at him, as Izuku would copy Stain's movements, but in the strength he would end up timesing it up a level just so he could end up gaining on Stain. As Izuku would be right behind Stain, he would grab Stain's foot before yanking it back. As Stain would end up flying back towards Izuku, he would end up grabbing the knife on his just side before pointing it right at Izuku's face. Putting his other hand on top of the knife, he would end up pushing it down as Izuku would be forced to do a spiral motion, dodging Stain's attack, as Izuku would then grab Stain's arm, pulling it down before twisting it up, as Stain would end up falling right down into his own knife, stabbing him right into his chest. As Stain would fall on it, it would go even deeper into him, completely piercing him right through. Luckily, it dodged all of his internal organs, which, lucky for Stain, meant he wasn't going to end up dying. However, he could still end up dying from blood loss, as Stain would be choking out, as he would end up looking towards Izuku, who was now standing above him. As Stain would end up blinking in and out of consciousness, he would end up blinking once before he would end up waking up as the police would end up being called. He was sitting on a stretcher with bandages all around his stomach with the knife removed, as Izuku would be sitting in the ambulance just watching to make sure Stain wasn't going to do anything stupid. What the hell? Where am I? As he would try to get up, Izuku would hold him down, telling Stain that he has to stay calm, as he would look on towards the hero that had stopped him before yelling, "You! What? Why are you helping me? I'm just a villain," as Izuku would just laugh. "Oh, sure, you're just a villain, but that doesn't mean you're not a person after all. You're still a human being. Why should I have just killed you? I'll never take someone's life for just being someone that goes against my own ideals. That's quite a shameful thought. You shouldn't be doing something like that." As the ambulance would slowly come to a stop, as Izuku would open the back door before stepping out, as he had now tied Stain down, knowing that he was fully aware of what he was doing, as Stain would end up looking at Izuku, but not talking. However, he was thinking, I guess all those words about this kid were true. Maybe he is the people's hero after all. As Stain would then be stretchered off into the building. As a week would pass, the 2 weeks would end up being over, as Izuku, now the 46th ranked hero, would end up walking away. Back to UA, of course, handing in his hero license. My, Izuku, I've watched all the news clips about you. You've built up quite the name for yourself, haven't you? I'd say congratulations, after all, I expected no less from you. As Izuku would just smile on towards Nezu. Izuku would smile on towards Nezu before thanking him for giving him the option and ability to go out and fight crime himself. As a week would end up passing, as not even the week later, Izuku would start to hear just news things, just looking on towards the news. And sure enough, all over the news was the copycat hero has strangely disappeared. After a short 2 weeks of copycat the hero stopping hundreds of villains, he's disappeared, much like he had said to many of the people he had saved that he would disappear in 2 weeks and that they shouldn't search for him. Many of the people would end up being confused by this, as they hadn't heard Izuku say this. However, some of the first few people Izuku saved, he would tell them that he's going to disappear in 2 weeks, and once his name is out there, they shouldn't try to look for him. As the news would be covering all of this, saying that the 46th ranked hero now disappearing, not doing any hero work. Many people just laugh at this. Oh please, he's only been 2 weeks into the hero business. It can be quite stressful. How do we know he just didn't take a break after all? After all, he did build up quite the name for himself in such a short amount of time. Maybe it got so stressful for him and he decided to take a little break. A month later, after all of this, people would end up still theorizing, as many heroes would come on and saying that their hero agencies would never let them take a month break, and it's safe to say that the copycat is just missing. As many people would try to search for him, however, they would be stopped by the few people that had heard Izuku tell them not to look for him. I'd say he's gone now. It's like an angel came from heaven to save most of us, but they only had 2 weeks down here to save many people, and they saved as many people as possible. So at least they did that, and it's only a tireless search to try to look for them. So, yeah, I wouldn't really say we should be looking for him right now. It's not gonna turn into anything. As after another month, people would end up finally allowing for Izuku, or the copycat hero, to rest, even building up statues of him, as that is how famous Izuku was. He was only the 46th hero, but in these small towns where Izuku would go around saving everyone and would go to them even if no other hero would, people loved that about Izuku. He wouldn't care about how much money he would get from it or if he even got any money at all. He had done all of his hero work for free, and with that, everyone loved him, especially in these small towns, building up statues of him because of how much saving he had done for them, and locking up all of these villains in this small town, making sure that it was safe for all their kids and future people that were going to end up living there. As all of this would end up being happening, Izuku would walk into class one day as Aizawa would tell them that finals were upon them, as all of the students would then be moved into a massive auditorium where papers would be handed out, where they would then have to take the final exams before the summer. It was sort of a mid-year exam for them all. It was sort of a final exam. However, it was just as hard as one, but it really wasn't the final exam for the year. So, with all of that, Izuku would be taking that and easily pass it. However, now since they are in the hero class, Izuku had to take the hero exam as well. It was going to be a 3 on a teacher. Teams of 3 would go up against a certain teacher. So Izuku and his 2 other teammates, being Kaminari and Mina, would end up facing off against Aizawa, as Izuku would end up copying Aizawa's quirk, erasing it, so when Aizawa went to erase someone else's quirk, he couldn't. And so with Mina's acid and Kaminari's electricity, they would easily be able to take down Aizawa, as Aizawa would be saying, Zuko, I'm guessing you copied my quirk and erased it. I'm not sure actually how you were able to do that. I never thought my quirk could actually be erased, but good job, I guess. As the rest of their class would end up going, and some of them would end up passing, while some of them would end up failing as well. As all of this would end up happening, Izuku and all of them would walk into school one day 2 weeks after the final exams had been held. Well, class, thank you all, as many of you had passed the final exam, or the midterm exam. We just like to call it the final exam to stress some more people out. But I thank you all for taking it, since a lot of you ended up, failing. And you're going to have to take summer school while we're all in these our training camp that we're going to be doing. So why don't you all travel down to the bus bay, as it's going to be a long 12 hours up to the mountain tops, as that is where we are going to be training you all. As everyone would just groan out, having to now sit on a bus for a whole 12 hours, as they would all travel down to the bus bay, getting onto the bus, as many of them would fall asleep. Aizawa had told them to stay up all night the other night, or the other day he had told them to stay up all night so that they could sleep tomorrow. However, all of them just thought he would end up pulling some crazy type of training where they would need tons of energy, and so many of them decided to sleep. As all of this happening, many of them would be wide awake for the entire trip on the bus, as all of them would just be sitting there bored out of their minds, creating small talk with some of their friends. Finally, after a long, excruciating 12-hour bus ride, they would end up making it up to the mountaintops, as many of them would marvel up at all of the mountains and everything below it. Aizawa would then say, "Look, we still have another 5-hour bus ride to where the training camp's located. So why don't you all head out?" As they would ask in confusion before being forced out of the bus. "What are you doing, Aizawa?" "Well, we still have 5 hours left until we make it to the training camp. You all, of course, have already spent 12 hours on the bus. So why don't you start walking the rest of the 5 hours?" As all of them would look on in shock at Aizawa. "What? We have to walk now? You're kidding, right?" As Aizawa would just laugh. "Nope, I'm not kidding at all. I'd get to walking now." As all of them would Aizawa would pile onto the bus. However, before it would start moving, 4 other heroes would just appear out of nowhere. "Well, hello, Class 1A. We're the 4 heroes that specialize in mountain hop hero work, and we're going to be training you. However, the first bit of training is making it and finding your way to the facility, which you're going to have to deal with some obstacles by our Quirks after all. So I'd get going before any of the obstacles start to appear in full force just yet." As the bus would speed off, all of Class 1A would end up groaning as they would then start walking. However, after 10 minutes of walking, another bus would speed on by them with all of the windows open, as there they would see Class 1B just taunting them as they would end up driving on by. As Class 1A would see this, many of them would rush up before jumping onto the roof of the Class 1B bus, as they would end up seeing many of the mud structures in the distance, and they weren't about to have to deal with this alone, as many of the people on the roof of the bus would end up finding a way to pop the tires below them, causing the bus to come to a screeching halt, as all of Class 1B would end up piling out of the bus. "Damn it, what the hell was that for?" "Well, I'm not just gonna let Class 1B pass us and make to the facility first. We saw your teacher was actually on our bus, and it was just you guys, and I assumed some random person was driving the bus. So I might as well just have them walk with us back, just for the pain of Class 1B too, since we're having to deal with this as well." As many of them would just be looking on sadly towards Class 1A, who had made them to walk with them. And with the combined help of Class 1B, Class 1A and B would end up easily destroying all of the mud sculptures and all of the things that would be just halting their time, causing them to make it to the facility in a striking 12 hours, meaning that the entire trip happened to take an entire day. And when they got back, the sun would end up being rising, as they would end up making it there, as breakfast would be waiting for them. "I thought you guys would be back sooner. We had a very lovely breakfast yesterday, or a very lovely lunch, and a very lovely dinner yesterday. It was quite good. I'm sorry you guys had to miss it. So we happened to make you guys all a singular pancake," as many of them would just run up to their food and plate, or just a random one, and start eating, as they had gone without food for quite a while. Some of them mostly just Izuku, would end up hunting some of the animals around, going off from the group, as he would end up running around, just end up capturing deer and cooking it with one of his fire quirks. As he would offer it to some of his classmates, however, many of them would decline. However, him and his two other friends, being Uraraka and Bakugo, would know it'd be foolish of them to decline such an offer, grabbing some of the deer meat from Izuku before just digging into it, as they hadn't had food in quite some time. So with all of that happening, they would finally make it to the training camp, where their months of hell would begin. 2 months and around 3 weeks of hell. All throughout summer, they wouldn't be able to see any other people besides just their class and Class 1B and the teachers, as all they were doing was constant training. Whether they went on a 3-mile run in the morning up some of the mountains surrounding them, going down the mountains, then running back up it 10 times every day, or just using their quirks in general over and over again. It was excruciating, all of that work every single day, day in and day out. That was all they would be doing, as many of them would just be longing for the end of the training camp, just waiting to go back and see their families or sit on a couch once again, as all they had were uncomfortable wooden chairs and cots that were cheaply made that they could all sleep on. There were no blankets, no just comfort items that they'd be using, as of course many of them didn't bother with the no blankets thing, as it was sometimes hot in the mountains. However, it would end up getting extremely cold at night, and many of the people who would ask would end up getting an extra mile ticked on to the total run that everyone had to do. So after a couple times of asking for blankets, everyone just sort of stopped and decided to deal with it. So when the final day finally came and they would be told that the day's up to you, we could care less what you're gonna do. However, we do have something planned for nighttime. Many of them would just love how they had finally gotten a day of relax. It was the last day of summer after all, and the teachers decided, hey, they've been just training for 3 months now, or almost 3 months. They might as well be able to get a day of relax at least. So many of them would head over to the hot springs, where they had spent most of the nights besides their night runs there, relaxing their muscles for the next day, as they would all spend some time just sitting there relaxing, as the night would end up just ticking on by, where they would end up coming out to see Aizawa and the rest of the teachers just sitting out on a campfire. Well, we decided to make up a game, Class 1B versus Class 1A. However, this isn't gonna be some, fight or anything. You all just did the UA Sports Festival. You all just don't need to be fighting right now. So, the game we're coming up with happens to be hide and go seek. So, that's basically what it is. Class 1B, however, is going to be going around as the Seekers trying to scare Class 1A. They also have to capture them after scaring them. It is a twist on hide and seek. It's not the game, or it's not like it. Or it's kind of like it. It's some random game we actually ended up coming up with. As the class would slowly nod their heads with the confusing explanation, as they would all just go out with Class 1A running off first. As all of this would end up being happening, they'd rush out just playing all of this game for hours. However, as soon as 12 a.m. hit, they would all end up hearing or smelling a burning, just scent, as many of them would look around wondering where that burning coming from. Many of them wouldn't care. Oh, it's just a campfire that the teachers had built. However, this wasn't the case, as many of them would look on above the horizon, and you would see massive blue flames towering over them like they were just an ant to a human standing over them. As they would look on in complete shock, there were skyscrapers and a city of flames coming right towards them. They were in awe at it. It was mesmerizing. So many of the students would just stare at it, as they just couldn't look on. However, many of them would end up realizing, this shouldn't be here. This doesn't belong. Many of them would rush back, trying to find their way back to the facility, and they would end up doing that, where they would end up being shoved into the building, where heroes would end up surrounding it. They decided to be too risky to go out and hunt for all of the students themselves, and would rather just stay back and defend many of the students there. It'd be too risky, as they would end up being split up if they were to go out into the forest. So with them all back there, these students in the forest were just hung out to dry. However, Izuku was one of the students that made it back to the facility in time. He decided to hide very close to the facility after all. As Izuku was running back to where the facility was, he would end up realizing something. Wait, where's Kota? As Izuku would end up realizing that one of the heroes people that were there, or one of their nephews, had just gone off. They were missing. As Izuku would ask the hero whose nephew it was, as she would end up looking on worried, not sure where he was. As Izuku would rush off looking for him, where he would end up finding where Kota's hideout was. As Izuku over that time had actually sort of become friends with Kota, as he would end up telling Kota that it's not good to push people away, and that's only something that would make him not have any friends, as Izuku would end up finding Kota sitting there up against a wall, staring at a massive person towering over him, much like the blue fire had done to many of his classmates. As Izuku would jump in, he would kick a muscular person, however it would go nowhere. As Izuku would use this to propel himself backwards, flipping over a rock, as he would end up halting himself, looking on, as Muscular would end up turning his massive body towards Izuku. Oh my, did you have a little hero come and rescue you, Kota? You're quite lucky. As Izuku would look on, as Muscular would end up smiling before cracking his knuckles. This is gonna be a fun fight. I haven't fought a twig in quite a while. However, as soon as Muscular said that, Izuku would copy his quirk before growing to the same size Muscular was. As Muscular would look on to see Izuku just standing right at him, as Izuku would run in before punching Muscular right across the face. Oh, so you're gonna try to use my own quirk against me. So I'm assuming you're that Izuku brat that the boss kept talking about. I'm in luck. I actually needed to kidnap you. As Muscular would try to wrap his arms around Izuku, however he couldn't. As Muscular would be trying to do this, Izuku would send ice shards flying everywhere, as a ball of ice with spikes all around it would form just around Izuku. As Izuku would have it happen, as he would hollow the ball out before being inside of it, as it would roll on towards Muscular at high speeds. As he would try to hit him, however, Muscular would try to dodge it, easily doing so. As Izuku would end up seeing this, he would end up shattering the ball of ice before grabbing one of the ice shards that he had broken, as he would put his finger into a flicking motion before flicking the butt end of the shard, as it would go flying before inserting itself directly into Muscular's one good eye. Ah, damn it, what the hell was that? As he would start to scream off in pain, as Izuku would just laugh. I noticed that your eye patch looking thing had fallen off and you don't actually have an eye under there. So I decided to make your one good eye and turn it into just making you blind, turning it into no good eyes, so you can't even see where I'm attacking you from. Muscular would turn around as if looking, trying to hear where Izuku was, just in an insane rage, as he would go off slamming his fists into the ground before yelling that he's gonna kill Izuku. And his family at that too. Rushing around, he would end up slamming into just rocks and just boulders, not knowing where he was going, as Izuku would use this to his advantage before appearing right behind Muscular and just pushing off of him, as Muscular would end up falling down, not able to keep his balance, as he would end up realizing that he was falling off the cliff edge and he shouldn't have done that, as his arm would reach out as if trying to grab onto something, but it couldn't, as he would then fall before a massive slam would end up being heard, as birds would end up flying from that, as Izuku would just look on towards the body below him before turning around to see Kota was hiding behind a rock. Izuku would offer his hand out to Kota before telling him, "Come on, it's time to go." As Kota would end up grabbing onto Izuku's hand, as he would then walk back to the facility with Kota. After Izuku made it back to the facility, he would end up running around saving all of his friends, making sure that none of them were hurt. As he would doing this, he would end up being thanked many times by his friends as he would build up a group of them where they would end up running around saving as many people as possible. As all of this would end up happening, Izuku would end up finally finding the last two people. These would end up being Todoroki and Bakugo. Both of them were fighting someone with a tooth-like quirk named Moonfish. As Izuku would end up asking if Bakugo wanted any help, of course Bakugo would say, I think I got it. Sure, your help isn't really needed, but it's always welcome. As Izuku would just smile at Bakugo's antics, where with their combined help they would easily be able to take down Moonfish. However, a massive smoke bomb would end up happening, as Izuku would look around wondering where it came from, as it would end up clearing, as all of a sudden his neck would end up being grabbed before being pulled into a portal. Gosh darn it, not again, Izuku would think. Izuku! Uraraka would yell, slamming her fists onto the ground as water would end up flowing right out of her eyes. Not again. She couldn't deal with Izuku gone the first time. How could she deal with it again? As Bakugo would yell, damn it, Izuku! You can't disappear again! As Bakugo would rush off, trying to reach for Izuku, however it was too late, as his whole body had already entered through the portal. As Bakugo would place his shoulder onto Uraraka, or place his hand onto Uraraka's shoulder. It's alright, Uraraka. I'll make sure we find him. As Uraraka would look up teary-eyed up to Bakugo before nodding her head, saying, right. As soon as Izuku falls out of the portal, he's instantly injected with some sort of serum from a needle. As Izuku all of a sudden starts to just feel nothing, falling into a deep sleep, falling down straight onto his face, as the people standing around them would say, looks like you actually managed to catch him. That's quite good. Hopefully Shigaraki's proud of this. As Shigaraki would walk into the villain hideout, as he would see Izuku's limp body sitting on the floor. Good. That damn brat escaped us once. I'll make sure he's not gonna escape us again, Shigaraki would say, clenching his fist, as with the help of Shigaraki and some other people standing around, they would lift up Izuku and carry him into some sort of just blank sort of room that all there was an old hospital, just medical bed sitting in the middle of it, as they would flop Izuku down onto the bed as they would then leave. As after a couple minutes, a doctor would walk in wearing gloves, holding another needle in their hand. You escaped us once, Izuku. You actually managed to see me. I saw your quirk when it was just in the early stages, and now you'll become a villain. That's quite cool. I'll be working with possibly one of the most powerful people. I have my hands right now. I could change everything about you. I could turn you into anything. I could make you a Nomu. I could give you extra quirks if I wanted to. I could honestly do anything. You're so weak in this state. As the doctor punching the needle in his hand, he would then look around Izuku's neck before putting the needle in it, as it would then a mysterious dark purplish liquid into Izuku. As a couple minutes would pass, as Shigaraki would walk in, as everything seemed normal and fine. However, after another minute or so, Izuku would all of a sudden rise, holding his head in pain. God damn it, what the hell makes my head hurt so much? As Izuku would look around before smiling, staring directly at the cyan-haired person standing right beside him. As Izuku would jump out of bed, leaping at Shigaraki, as his fingers would wrap around Shigaraki's neck, making sure his pinky wasn't touching Shigaraki. So, Shigaraki, we finally meet again. I know you're not the true leader of villains. You're just one of their underlings, of the true boss, but that doesn't matter right now, as Izuku, still clenching Shigaraki's neck, would knock Shigaraki out before lifting up the limp Shigaraki's body and tossing it over to the doctor. Hey, doctor, why don't you go ahead and make that Shigaraki into some sort of Nomu, will ya? His disintegration quirk would work quite well with it. As the doctor would nod his head, Izuku would then walk off. The doctor had just realized Izuku was now far more powerful than he had far thought that villainous serum would actually do. It had completely shifted Izuku's memories and had altered his perception to make him more of a villain. And now the doctor saw Izuku as way scarier, and since Izuku, as a hero, was afraid to kill anyone, he couldn't do it. However, as a villain, he could care less. He was constantly juggling life and death in his hands, as he just didn't care, and the doctor realized this, so he would decide to obey Izuku's word. As Izuku would walk into the bar, everyone would see Izuku sitting there, so they would just say, "Hush, Izuku, it appears you're finally back from your stay with the doctor." "Yeah, I am back. Although you might not be seeing Shigaraki for much longer as his normal self." "What do you mean?" Toga would ask, sitting on one of the couches right next to Izuku. "Well, I asked the doctor to make him into a Nomu. You know, the disintegration quirk really wasn't cutting out as a leader of this league, but it would cut out as a Nomu, rather, so I decided to make him into one." As all of the people sitting around would just say, "Huh? Wait, then who's the new leader of the league?" "Well, that would be me. Since I was able to defeat Shigaraki, that technically makes me the leader." As many people would just say, "Oh, well, I don't care. I mean, Shigaraki was sort of our friend, but he was also mean to us, so who cares? He was kind of stupid anyways. He wasn't really the best of leaders, not staying cool and when you should be calm in a situation." So with Shigaraki now gone, Izuku was now the leader of the League of Villains. However, Izuku would start to think, "I've heard about a villain named All for One. I possibly want to see who this could be. I wonder if he's any stronger than I am." As Izuku was thinking this, all of a sudden there would be a knock on a door right next to Izuku. He would look over, reaching down towards the handle, but would violently pull his hand back, knowing that he shouldn't open that door. All of a sudden, however, the door would be smashed in as Izuku would dive out of the way behind the bar behind Izuku. As there stood a shining golden figure standing there as he would then start laughing. "What have you done with Izuku?" he would yell, striking fear into the villains around them. However, they had done nothing to Izuku. He was all fine and well. Well, rather just the injection they had given Izuku to make him into a villain, that is. So Izuku would be sitting behind the bar thinking of his strategy as he would then look up at All Might before copying All Might's quirk. As All Might would see the green hair pop up from the bar as he would reach down to try to grab Izuku. However, before he could, his arm would be violently thrown backwards as he was now stumbling back. "Oh, so this is what your power feels like, All Might." What? Who the hell are... All Might would try to utter, however he couldn't. No words were able to be coming out of his mouth anymore as a punch would land directly into All Might's stomach, knocking the air out of him. "So much power! Is this how you feel every day, All Might? It's so good." As Izuku would be staring down at his fists. However, a gray, goopish-looking portal would start to open up as All for One would reach his hand out of it, grabbing on to one of the bar stools, pulling it back, or throwing it back into the portal. My, it appears that serum worked quite well for Izuku. It made you quite a bit stronger than your hero self really was. All Might would get up, still holding his stomach, before yelling, "All for One! What have you done? What have you done to Izuku?" As All for One would just laugh. "Oh, I've done nothing to Izuku. Well, a needle did something to him. I didn't. I didn't even touch it." As All Might would grab his hands down, clinching the earth beneath him, before projecting himself right at All For One, trying to grab All For One's face mask. However, he couldn't, being backhanded by All For One right into the bar, shattering glasses as little glass shards would end up falling down, hitting All Might's face and sticking into some of his skin, tearing his hero suit. As All Might would then get up before trying to rush at All For One once again. However, All For One wasn't talking. He just wasn't moving at all. As All Might would stop in his tracks as he would see a hand glowing with a mysterious aura right through All For One's stomach. As All For One would start to choke out words as his respirator around his head would start to malfunction. As Izuku would violently pull his hand back before laughing. Oh, all this power. I guess this is quite good. I'll make sure to use it wisely. As Izuku would then backhand All For One, much like he had done to All Might, as All For One would start to fall down, his body now limp. He had completely been just dead from Izuku's blow to his stomach, as Izuku had completely shredded all of his organs, killing All For One instantly. As All Might would look on in pure horror as Izuku's hands and arms were now glowing. I guess my copy quirk really needs something. With All For One's quirk and now One For All in my bank, I've made the perfect combination. All for all. I can do anything with this power, and no one's here to stop me. As All Might would rush towards Izuku, trying to stop him, pleading with Izuku to come back to the hero's side, that it's not. What have they done to you? He would continue on mumbling out random things. He was completely in shock. Here is one of his students he'd been training for months now, and he was one of the brightest students who had a great future. However, now all of that future had just been dissolved and disintegrated into nothingness, as Izuku stood there clenching his fists, just laughing. Well, All Might, I guess you should possibly say goodbye to your little students over there, as All Might would violently shake his head round and round looking for someone, as he would end up seeing some of his students cowering behind a wall, now looking at their former classmate, as they just weren't sure what had Izuku become, as Izuku would clinch the top of Might's head before bashing it into his knee. His blood would now flow freely down All Might's nose, as Izuku would then slam him down into the woods, shattering it, splintering off into All Might's face. As Izuku would then elbow All Might right in the neck, cracking it, leaving All Might completely paralyzed, as Izuku would then leave the limp All Might there to bleed out and suffer in pain, as Izuku would look over towards the classmates. All Might had decided to go off and find Izuku just on impulse, as they actually had a plan to go save Izuku the night after the one that had just transpired. And with all of the students, or some of the students that wanted to save Izuku, they saw All Might run off, and even heard him say that he was going to find Izuku, so that they would decide to follow him, and that's where they ended up. However, they didn't find Izuku. They only found a monster in a shell of what Izuku had once been, as Izuku would stare on towards his former classmates, as his eyes would glow a deep purple. So, does anyone want to come at me first? Bakugo would rush off, just glaring at Izuku. What the hell have you become, Izuku? What's happened to you? As Izuku would just laugh. Oh, Bakugo, I guess out of all the people you wouldn't understand the most. I've become a better self than what I prior to this. Anyway, I guess I should take you all out now before you become an even bigger threat in the near future. It's only a wise decision. As Izuku would rush up towards Bakugo before grabbing his head, slamming it into the knee, as the now shocked Bakugo would fall down to his knees, just not sure. Here, stood in front of him, was his best friend. He had been training with Izuku for years, but now all of that had just been thrown out of the window, as Izuku was now just going to kill him. He couldn't comprehend it. They had always wanted to become heroes together, but now Izuku, one of the best people he'd ever met, one of the people that had trained with him, one who made him a better person, was now trying to kill him, devolved into a life of crime and villainy. He couldn't comprehend it at all. As Izuku would be standing above Bakugo, as Bakugo's still sitting on his knees, as tears would start to flow out of his eyes. He couldn't comprehend it at all. It was insane, as Izuku would then smile. Good. Since you're deciding not to fight, I'll give you a quick and painless death, as Izuku's hand, now glowing a bright purple, would then slash, as the head of Bakugo would topple over to the ground as his body would then fall down limply to the floor. As a loud thump would be heard as his classmates would look on in shock, Uraraka would now rush out, hugging Izuku, screaming at him, what the hell has he done? What has he become? Much like Bakugo had, as Izuku would just laugh. Oh, Uraraka, I always had feelings for you, at least before a couple of hours ago. But now I see those were just foolish emotions that have just gotten my way of my true life's work. No. This can't be Izuku. What the hell have you done with Izuku? Uraraka would yell as Izuku would start to laugh even further, as the laughs would echo, bouncing off of the buildings all surrounding Izuku and his former classmates. Oh, Uraraka, if only you weren't so blind. Maybe I should help you with that, as Izuku would then plunge both of his fingers right into her eyes, as she would scream out in pain, completely terrified at what Izuku had become. She was now completely blind, much like Izuku had just said, as she would fall down to the floor, holding her eyes, still screaming in agony and pain, as Izuku would then start to laugh. Well, since you're not putting up a fight like Bakugo, I might as well end your suffering and misery as well, as Izuku, raising up his arm, would then slash, as Uraraka's head would fall down to the floor once again, as now Todoroki, Mo, and Kaminari now rush out from behind the corner, all trying to take down Izuku. However, they were all stopped in an instant, as they would all be frozen, not able to move, as they were now dead as well, much like the two sitting on the floor beneath Izuku. As all of a sudden, someone would come rushing out with the same green hair as Izuku. Izuku would look on to see that it was his very own mother, crying, yelling for Izuku to stop, as a spotlight would be placed on Izuku. It was a news helicopter, as it was now watching, recording Izuku's every move, even possibly listening in to what he was saying, as Izuku would stare directly on towards his mother, who was crying, beating on his chest, yelling for him to stop, as Izuku would stare down at her. "What do you want, mother?" Izuku would say in a cold, raspy voice, as she would continue on crying, now even harder. "Izuku, what have you become? You can't become a villain. You always wanted to become a hero. I always remember you screaming and yelling like you were going to become All Might one day. What happened to you?" Inko would say, as Izuku would only stare down towards his mother in a cold way. He couldn't think of anything. There his very own mother was, as Izuku would grab and grip onto Inko's back, before Inko, thinking Izuku had started to come over to her side, as all of a sudden she would feel a sharp pain right into her chest. "This is hard for me to say, Mom, but I think it's time for you to go." As Izuku would violently pull his arm back, as Inko would then fall down onto Izuku. Izuku would grab her limp body, as her eyes now cold and completely void of any emotion, as she had died as well, as Izuku would pick her up before laying her down on the ground gently, as Izuku would then walk off, walking into a portal after copying Kurogiri's Quirk, as he would then find himself in a Nomu warehouse where the rest of the League of Villains were watching the news, which happened to be what Izuku was on, as Izuku would sit there, the news reporting this, just saying many people were dead, as police would end up arriving on the scene, searching everywhere throughout the ruins of the buildings Izuku had collapsed. "Well, I guess we have ourselves a new boss, hey?" Dabi would say, looking around, as many of them would just sort of laugh, quite scared of what Izuku was. He had defeated All for One, someone who they were completely afraid of, one who could just snap his fingers and they would be dead in an instant, and Izuku had killed him in such an easy, calm way. They were completely frightened. They couldn't think of someone who could be this powerful. They knew now if they kept with Izuku, they would surely have power, and Izuku, if they were to wrong him, they knew he'd kill them. He had the power to do so. as Izuku would be sitting down on a box before thinking long and hard. He had just killed many of his closest friends and even his mother. He had killed All Might, the number one hero and All for One, possibly the number one villain in the area. Izuku just had to think for a moment. As Izuku was thinking this, the day would end up passing as Izuku would end up falling asleep. The next day, Izuku would wake up as the news were still just reporting on what Izuku had done, as they were even reporting on Izuku, asking if anyone had even seen Izuku. They need to report it to the police as possible. He's the most dangerous subject or the most dangerous criminal in possibly the world. He had killed the number one hero, after all, on live television. Everyone saw it watching the news that night, that Izuku had easily just killed All Might with the flick of his wrist. They just couldn't think that a villain could be so powerful. Their shining ray of hope had just been decimated by Izuku. And over the next couple of weeks, Izuku would slowly start to hunt down the top 50 heroes, completely killing them all off. As what Copycat, the copy hero, once was, had completely been disappeared. Many of the people had seen that all of the top 50 pro heroes had been completely killed besides Copycat, as many people would be yelling, asking, pleading for Copycat to come back and save them from this hell. However, he never came back, as Copycat had become the one they wanted him to save them from. As Izuku would go around killing his enemies, many of them heroes, he would even go to UA and completely destroy the school with the help of the League of Villains, planting devices, causing explosions, sending the towers of UA and the dormitories falling down, slamming into the people below them, as fires would rain long, hard throughout the city, completely turning everything into ash and ruins of what they had once been, as casualties would rank high in the millions, as Izuku would go on a rampage, completely destroying all of the cities, as he would sit high on a throne, realizing that he had achieved everything. He had all this power. He now had no one who could possibly stop him. No hero was possibly strong enough to take him out. He destroyed all of those who had even tried to kill him. As Izuku would be sitting there, all of a sudden someone would smash through the door. It was a small-time villain agency, or a villain hideout, people and just a villain group that Izuku had neglected to do, as people now ranked in thousands of people would join Izuku's ranks, knowing if they couldn't beat him, they might as well join him, as Izuku would overthrow the country's government, now becoming the ruler, the emperor of the country they lived in. However, there was one person that could stop Izuku, and this just happened to be Overhaul. With now power of these bullets that couldn't possibly erase someone's quirk, Overhaul knew if he were to end this reign of terror, he would have to become a hero, something he truly despised, as Overhaul would end up joining through the ranks and passing up to Izuku, as finally, once he was close enough to Izuku, he would end up blindsiding him, putting the weapon up to his neck, telling Izuku that it's over. His reign of terror is now done for, as Izuku would just sort of laugh. Overhaul, I've seen you rise through the ranks. I know what you've been trying to do all along. See, with power comes people trying to take that power from you. So they know it would be quite easy, as all they have to do is beat you, and now they're the ruler of that league. It's how I got my power. And so I knew people were going to try to betray me. I've had my very closest people here. They told me about these quirk-canceling, quirk-erasing bullets that you happen to made with the help of a young girl named Eerie. Now I truly am a low-life villain who destroys and kills hundreds of people. But doing that to just a little girl, making her suffer, why didn't you just end her life and cleanly, making them so they're not devolved in a life of pain? That's what I would do. Well, for you made that little girl suffer, and so I'll make you suffer as well. As Izuku grabbed the gun in such a quick motion, pulling it around before aiming it right at Overhaul's forehead, pulling the trigger as it would then implant itself right into one. As he would fall backwards, he was now completely corkless, as the serum would end up flowing throughout Overhaul. As all of this was happening, Eri would be taken to Izuku, where he would then meet her. Over the next couple of years, Izuku would rule over the land that Izuku resided in, as many people tried and failed to take over what Izuku's empire had become. Izuku had stopped all of the villainy, as he knew that with an army, he didn't have to become such a villainous person. However, his legacy was that of villainy, as he had gotten all of his power through being a villain. And so Izuku would start to try to make up for that, doing other small things. He even adopted Eri, as she was now his child and his heir to the throne, as he would end up using All for One when Izuku was old and on his deathbed to give Eri his copy quirk, while also the knowledge of all the quirks that he had gotten, giving her the power of his emperorcy, as even giving her the heir to the throne, making her the new emperor. As all of this would be happening, the world would slowly grow to accept that the empire of Midoriya was now just another part of the world. They couldn't do anything to stop it, as no one had a powerful enough quirk to even be able to defeat the Midoriyas, being Izuku or Eri. And that is where this what if ends, with Izuku now reigning over his empire, as no one would be able to stop him until a new powerful quirk would end up arising, either out of his empire or in it. However, that wouldn't happen for hundreds of years, and when the emperors and heirs would end up growing old and evil with shady ways, as there's always going to be good emperors and bad ones, it's just a matter of time until each end up taking position in the role of power. And that was the main ending to What If Deku Had a Perfect Copy Quirk. And this is now the alternate ending to What If Deku Had a Perfect Copy Quirk. I hope you all do enjoy it, and now, let's begin. Izuku being pulled into the portal, he would instantly turn around, flicking the hand that was pulling him, gripping his neck hard, pulling him into the portal off. As Izuku would see Shigaraki trying to stab him with a needle. However, he would grab Shigaraki's arm before disintegrating it. As Shigaraki would look on in shock, his other hand would end up being grabbed as well, being disintegrated as well. Now, with Shigaraki being basically quirkless, not being able to use his quirk, he would end up staring directly down at his two nubs of his former hands. As he would just look on in shock, he would be knocked out by a flying fist of Izuku. As Izuku would look on towards the other people standing around him, as he would then just smile. So does anyone want to go down just like Shigaraki here? Or are you gonna just give up now? Since you're all gonna end up being defeated anyway, it doesn't really matter. The villains wouldn't let Izuku take them down so easily. They weren't going to go down without a fight, as they would all try to jump Izuku simultaneously. Without the teamwork that Izuku had built up at UA, they wouldn't be able to do such a thing. Izuku had knowledge of teamwork. These guys didn't, and so they weren't able to work together. As all of them would try to jump Izuku, they would bump into each other, sending others flying back, as Izuku would use this opportunity to knock out the people coming at him, before quickly and swiftly knocking out the others around him. As all of a sudden, a knock on the door would be heard, as Izuku would go to open up the door, where a fist would end up being sent flying through, going right through the now open door, as the person throwing the fist would end up stumbling forward, as they would now see Izuku standing in front of them. "Oh, Izuku! So glad I finally found you where you were." As All Might would then peer into what Izuku had done, as he would end up seeing all throughout the room, as there was bodies laying everywhere. "Yeah, we should possibly put court-canceling handcuffs on all of these guys pretty quickly." All Might would nod his head, as police would come flying into the building, putting handcuffs all over them. However, All for One, watching this throughout the security camera, wasn't about to have any of this, as gray goop would start to form out of nowhere, materializing, as he would then reach his hand out as if trying to grip Izuku's neck. However, Izuku would see this, dodging it before gripping All for One, pulling him forward. "So, All Might, I finally decided I should probably copy your quirk. I've been thinking about it and decided I should need your permission since it is basically my quirk to copy anything. As All Might would just look on in shock, not realizing that Izuku could have just copied his quirk all along. As All for One would then laugh. Well, if it isn't the Copycat. I've heard much about you and your copying quirk. I heard it's quite strong. I can't wait to get my hands on it. As Izuku would just sort of laugh. Oh, you think you're going to be able to defeat me? That's simply not the case, All for One, as I've already copied your quirk and All Might's. With All for One and One for All now in my grasp, I now have the perfect combination, All for All. You simply don't stand a chance against me. All for One would simply just laugh. Do you know how many years I've been a villain, kid? I have far more combat experience than you'll ever have. Oh, if so, you'll know not to draw on a losing battle, as Izuku would then jump towards All for One, smashing his fist, plunging it into All for One's breathing device, completely shattering it in two, as the two halves would fall down, making a thump noise down on the ground, as All for One, now not being able to breathe as well as he could with his helmet on, he would know he wasn't going to win this fight, or if he was going to have to take out both All Might and Izuku quickly. However, before anything else could happen, both Izuku and All Might would end up throwing punches side by side, landing it right on All for One's head, bashing it inwards, denting All for One's head, basically sending him flying back into the wall, as shards of wood would end up toppling over right onto All for One, as the TV hanging right above him would end up dangling there, as the wire would end up cutting, just being split in two, sending it flying directly down onto All for One, shattering the TV screen directly on top of All for One's head, as All for One, now with a concussion, would try to get up. However, everything would look dizzy, as police would end up rushing in, and with the help of All Might and Izuku, they would put on enlarged quirk-canceling handcuffs, as they would then throw him into the back of a cop car. It would then speed off into a very high-security prison, where he would then be locked down into a very quiet room where no noise would be heard, just plunging All for One into madness, not being able to hear anything, only if someone were to come visit him. However, many people didn't, as he was tied down relentlessly with quirk-canceling devices surrounding him, making sure he would never be able to use his quirk again. As all of this would end up being happening, Izuku would go back to UA, where everyone would greet him, as Uraraka would jump into his arms, crying that she's so glad that he's back, as Izuku would just laugh. Yeah, I'm glad I'm back too. It's been rough having to be kidnapped by the League of Villains so many times. However, we shouldn't have to worry about them any longer. Me and All Might pretty much took care of that. As any of the students who don't watch the news would look on in shock, as Bakugo would then laugh. Well, that stupid Izuku managed to defeat All for One of the craziest villains that even All Might couldn't defeat in years prior, but now with the help of Izuku, I guess things changed. As everyone would look on in shock, as Izuku would just sort of laugh. Well, I guess I'm quite the strong one, ain't I? As many of the class would just nod their heads, being like, yeah, Izuku, of course you're strong. You're Izuku, after all. You have main character powers. As would happen, months would end up passing. Izuku and his class would end up getting their quirk licenses, easily passing through and defeating the competition. As with the help of Izuku, they were easily able to do it. However, with Izuku's reputation now being splattered all over the news as the one who helped All Might defeat one of the major villains, everyone wanted to target them. Everyone wanted to get a piece of what Izuku and his reputation had become. As with all of this, Izuku knew that people were going to be targeting him in Class 1A even more than if Izuku had just stayed quiet and stayed in the shadows. And so with that, they would have a little bit of trouble, with some of them almost being knocked out. But with the help of Izuku, like I said, they would easily be able to get their quirk licenses and with the help of Aizawa ingraining into their mind, knowing that teamwork is how you become a hero and how heroes are forced to work. Heroes that don't use teamwork are never going to be successful, and so with that, they were able to use teamwork to take down the villains during the final part of the licensing exam, while also saving many people, mostly with the help of Uraraka with her extensive rescue training from Izuku and Bakugo. As the years would end up passing, Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki would end up becoming the next big three at UA. Uraraka would be the big four if there was such a thing, but it doesn't exist. She was on the cusp of making it in, but everyone knows she wasn't going to beat Todoroki anytime soon, meaning that Todoroki being the third best person on the new big three of UA. However, before we get into the UA graduation, one thing happened during the work study. Izuku, of course, wanting to know further and wanting to have more knowledge, would end up going to just Night Eye's office to have the work study. And with that, Izuku would end up having the Overhaul just encounter where he would end up seeing Eri. Izuku, who would recognize Overhaul after seeing some pictures of him from Night Eye, he would end up grabbing Eri by the hand, yanking her backwards before putting a portal beneath him, copying Hirogiri's quirk, as he would then fall into the portal, waving to Overhaul with a smile. As Izuku would put a portal into Night Eye's office before falling down, landing right on the chair with Eri in hand. What the hell? So, can you explain to me what happened? Night Eye would say, with Izuku holding Eri, who's now sitting on his lap, completely just confused, as she had bumped into him before looking up as if with a glance of her eyes, yelling for Izuku, pleading with him to save her, and that's exactly what Izuku had done. As she was sitting in Izuku's lap, just looking around, frantic, not sure if Overhaul was going to come out there any second and kidnap her with an instant. As Izuku was explaining how him and Mirio were able to just run into Overhaul on a lucky encounter, Izuku would end up grabbing Eri back, falling through one of the portals that he had made. As Mirio would nod his head, with Night Eye looking towards him, as Night Eye would then sigh. Izuku, why the hell did you have to do that? Now we stand the risk of Overhaul breaking into our office at any second. And sure enough, an explosion would end up being heard from down the hall. Izuku would calmly open the door, as he would end up seeing Overhaul looking around in a complete rage, as Izuku would say, leaning back into the office, "Yeah, he's here right now." All of a sudden, Izuku would end up being grabbed by the back of the neck, violently being pulled backwards. "You! Where the hell is Eri?" Overhaul would yell, as he would then slam Izuku down into the ground. By the way, I pronounce Eri and not Eri. I'm sorry about that. It's just something random that I've done. I'm sorry that I pronounce it wrong from how the anime pronounces it. I'm just stupid because I pronounce it Eri and not Eri. I don't know why I do it. I have no clue why. I'm just stupid. That's a simple explanation. Getting back into the story, Izuku would be slammed down into the ground, sending him flying down through the halls, as Izuku would copy Overhaul's quirk, jumping up before two fingers touch Overhaul, as all of a sudden Overhaul would splatter all over the place as his liquids and fluids would fly everywhere, painting the walls with red, as Eri, whose eyes were covered now with Mirio's hands, as Eri just being saved by Izuku. As all of this would be happening, Night Eye would walk out into the hallway before just shrugging his shoulders. Well, I guess that takes care of Overhaul then, as Izuku would stare directly down at his hands. He had never killed someone before, but yet he didn't care. He knew that Overhaul was the pure incarnation of evil. How dare he do something so vile to a little girl? He had heard stories of what Night Eye had told him, and Izuku just couldn't comprehend such a little girl being devolved into such a torture for her entire life. Izuku would years would end up passing, and Izuku and Uraraka would end up getting together and would start dating. And Izuku, of course, with the help of his mother, would end up taking a test to see if he was actually responsible enough. Remember, Izuku's only 15 still, to adopt Eri. Izuku had saved her and he felt a connection from the very beginning. And so he would adopt Eri, and Uraraka would also do so as well. And so, during UA graduation, Izuku would graduate as he would end up just graduating with the rest of his class. And that is where he would end up proposing to Uraraka, and they would end up getting married, with Eri now their adopted daughter, as years would end up passing. Years now into the future, we see the number one hero, Copycat, standing above a ledge, looking down onto a city completely cleared out of crime. With Izuku the number one hero now, crime rates had completely dropped to almost near little percentage. No one had thought it could happen. With the help of Izuku, he had spread just the work of heroes and hero agencies into smaller towns and cities, rather than them just all being crammed into a massive city. Izuku had built up a reputation as the hero, or the people's hero, and so Izuku wanted to keep that, making sure he was completely respectful and always saving people in cities that many heroes would just completely avoid and not bat an eye to. And so Izuku and Uraraka would end up having a couple children, as they would end up passing through UA, with them having a mix of a gravity quirk and even a copy quirk, as they would end up being the new just big three, with possibly Bakugo's child as well mixed in there, as that would end up becoming the new top three heroes in decades after this. And that is the alternate ending to What If Deku had a perfect copy quirk. And that is where this What If ends. I hope you all did enjoy the series and both of the endings. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.